Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, a place where curiosity is allowed to slow down, stretch out, and rest a little, where big ideas are explored gently without urgency, and where science takes its time, because tonight, time itself is under no obligation to hurry. Before we settle in, before thoughts begin to loosen their grip, and the edges of the day soften, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it for you, wherever you happen to be? It's an ordinary question, one we ask without thinking most days, yet it already carries a quiet strangeness. A number on a clock, a place on the planet, a moment you feel yourself occupying. All of it feels obvious, all of it feels solid, and yet, by the time you answer, that moment is already gone, replaced by another that feels just as present, just as real. If you find this space calming, or if these slow explorations help your thoughts unwind at the end of the day, you're always welcome to like the video or subscribe. It helps this quiet corner reach others who might also be looking for something steady to rest their attention on. And now, with nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to go, we can begin. Tonight's idea may sound unsettling at first, or perhaps oddly comforting, depending on how you approach it. The future already exists, not as a guess, not as a prediction, not as a plan written in pencil, but as something that is already there in the structure of the universe, and at the same time the passage of time, the feeling that moments move, that seconds slide forward, that now turns into then, may not exist at all in the way we usually imagine it. That tension between those two ideas is where we'll stay for a while. There's no rush to resolve it. No requirement to accept anything immediately. Think of this not as an argument that needs to convince you, but as a slow walk around a shape, looking at it from different sides, noticing how it changes depending on where you stand. Most of us live as though time is something that flows. We talk about time passing. We say it moves quickly or slowly. We feel it drag during waiting rooms and speed up during good conversations. We imagine ourselves moving forward through it, like travellers on a road that stretches endlessly ahead, with the past behind us and the future somewhere out of sight. That picture is deeply intuitive. It fits our memories, it fits our language, it fits the way our days unfold. Yet intuition is not always a reliable guide to how the universe is arranged. There are many things that feel obvious until we look at them closely. The Earth feels still beneath our feet, yet it is spinning faster than a jet aircraft. The sun feels like it rises and sets, yet it is we who are turning. Solidity feels absolute, until we learn that matter is mostly empty space. Time may belong in that same category, familiar, convincing, possibly misleading. Consider how confidently we talk about the present moment. We point to it as though it has sharp edges. Now. This instant, the only thing that is truly real. But try to isolate it. Try to define how long the present lasts. Is it a second? A fraction of a second? Does it have any duration at all? The moment you try to measure it, it slips away. What you thought was now becomes a memory, and the next now arrives without announcement. Even our most precise clocks do not actually capture a moving present. They count changes, vibrations in atoms, oscillations in crystals, transitions between energy states. Nothing inside a clock points to a travelling moment sweeping across reality. There is no mechanism ticking along saying, "This is now, and now it has passed." There is only a sequence of states, each one different from the last. This is where physics begins to quietly diverge from everyday experience. Not with dramatic declarations, but with subtle mismatches that accumulate over time. When physicists describe the universe at its most fundamental level, they do not usually describe it as something that unfolds moment by moment. Instead, they describe relationships, structures, equations that relate one configuration of the universe to another. And strikingly often, time does not appear as a flowing ingredient within those equations. In some of the most successful theories we have, time is treated less like a river and more like a coordinate, similar to space. You can label events by where they are and when they are. But nothing in the mathematics insists that one moment must be experienced before another. The equations do not care which way time flows, and sometimes they do not include flow at all. This leads to an idea that feels deeply counterintuitive at first, that the universe may already be complete, not finished in a narrative sense, but complete in the way a landscape is complete. Every point exists, whether or not you are standing on it. The mountain does not come into being when you hike toward it. The valley does not vanish when you leave it behind. They simply are. If time is part of the structure of the universe in the same way space is, then past, present and future may all exist together, laid out in a four-dimensional arrangement sometimes called spacetime. In that picture, nothing moves from the future into the present or from the present into the past. Instead, all events occupy their own locations within this structure. Your birth, this moment of listening, a conversation you haven't had yet, all equally part of the whole. This does not mean that everything feels the same from the inside. Experience is another matter entirely. Experience is local. It is constrained to a perspective. You do not perceive the entire landscape at once. You perceive a narrow path through it, one slice at a time, stitched together by memory and expectation. That stitching may be where the sensation of passage comes from, not from the universe itself, but from how minds operate within it. Think about how a book exists. Every page is already printed. The ending does not wait to be written once you start reading, yet while you read, the story feels like it is unfolding. Characters develop. Tension builds. Events happen in sequence. That sense of movement exists because of how you engage with the book, not because the pages rearrange themselves as you go. If the universe is more like a book than a river, then the future already exists in the same sense the last page exists. It is part of the structure. What does not exist, according to this view, is a glowing cursor moving line by line through reality, marking a universal now as it goes. At this point, it's normal to feel a flicker of resistance. If the future already exists, doesn't that mean everything is fixed? Doesn't that erase choice, effort, surprise? Those questions are important, and we will come back to them later. For now, it's enough to notice that existence does not automatically imply inevitability in the way we usually imagine it. A road can exist without forcing you to walk it the same way as someone else. A map can be complete without dictating how it is experienced. What matters here is the distinction between structure and sensation. Physics is primarily concerned with structure. It asks what exists, how things relate, what patterns remain consistent. It does not prioritize how it feels to live inside those patterns. Feeling is the domain of brains, bodies and nervous system that evolved to function in a changing environment. Your brain did not evolve to perceive space-time as a static whole. It evolved to track change, anticipate outcomes, and remember what just happened. Those abilities are incredibly useful. They keep you safe. They help you plan. They allow learning. But they also impose a narrative framework onto reality, one that organizes events into before and after, cause and effect, anticipation and regret. That narrative framework is so convincing that it becomes invisible. You don't usually notice that your experience of time is something your brain constructs. It feels given, obvious, as basic as gravity or breath. Yet small disruptions reveal its flexibility. Long nights feel longer than short ones, even when the clock disagrees. Familiar routes feel quicker than unfamiliar ones. Emotional intensity stretches moments. Routine compresses years. These distortions are not errors, they are clues. They suggest that the sensation of time passing is not something you are detecting, like light or sound, but something you are assembling moment by moment from memory, attention and expectation. The universe does not need to move for you to experience movement. It only needs to contain differences and for you to encounter them in sequence. From this perspective, saying that the passage of time does not exist is not the same as saying nothing changes. Change is everywhere. Stars form and burn out. Bodies grow and age. Thoughts arise and dissolve. What may not exist is a separate entity called time that flows independently of these changes. Instead, change itself may be primary, and time may be a way of organizing change after the fact. This idea has an unexpected calming quality when you sit with it. If there is no cosmic clock pushing you forward, no universal current carrying you away from moments you wish you could hold on to, then perhaps nothing is truly being taken from you. Moments do not vanish. They remain where they are, part of the structure, even if you are no longer located there. Likewise, moments you worry about are not rushing toward you. They already have their place. Your experience of approaching them is a feature of perspective, not a countdown enforced by the universe. That does not make experience meaningless. If anything, it makes it more specific. You're not racing against time. You're occupying a particular region of reality, aware of some parts and not others, moving through experience even if the universe itself is not moving at all. Simply notice that you're here, listening, breathing, aware. Not because time has delivered you to this moment, but because this moment is one of many that exist, and this is where your attention happens to be resting right now. It often begins as a quiet thought rather than a clear statement, a feeling that slips in when you think about tomorrow or next year, or some distant moment you imagine yourself standing in. There is a sense, subtle but persistent, that whatever is going to happen is not forming from nothing, but is somehow already arranged. Not planned in detail, not written out as a script, but present in a way that is difficult to describe without sounding strange. People sometimes notice this feeling late at night, when the usual noise of the day has settled, and the mind starts wandering without a destination. You might recognize it when you picture an upcoming event, a meeting, a trip, a conversation you know you will eventually have. Even though it has not happened yet, it feels oddly solid. You can imagine yourself there, speaking words that have not been spoken, standing in a place you're not currently standing, reacting to things that have not yet occurred. The scene feels incomplete but not unreal. It has a kind of weight to it, as though it belongs somewhere in the world already, waiting rather than forming. This sensation is not usually framed as a philosophical problem. Most of the time we shrug it off as imagination, planning, anticipation, useful mental habits, and they are useful. But the feeling itself raises an interesting question. Why does the future feel like a place you are approaching, rather than a set of possibilities being created moment by moment? Why does it feel as though it exists ahead of you, instead of being assembled as you go? Language plays a role here. We talk about the future as something that lies in front of us. We move toward it. We look forward to things. We leave the past behind. These expressions are so common that they barely register as metaphors. They feel literal. The future is ahead. The past is behind. Now is where we stand. But notice how spatial this language is. Ahead, behind, approaching, leaving. These are words we usually reserve for physical locations, roads, rooms, landscapes. We do not normally describe something that does not exist using the same terms we use for places that do, and yet, when it comes to time, we do exactly that without hesitation. Part of this comes from how memory and imagination work together. Your brain uses many of the same systems to remember the past and to imagine the future. When you recall a previous experience, you reconstruct it. You do not replay it like a recording. You rebuild it from fragments, sights, sounds, feelings, context. When you imagine a future event, you perform a similar reconstruction, except the fragments are drawn from past experiences and recombined into something new. Because both processes use overlapping neural machinery, imagining the future can feel similar to remembering the past. Both feel like you are mentally visiting a place rather than inventing one. This overlap makes the future feel less abstract than it logically should. It feels less like a blank and more like a location you simply have not reached yet. However, this psychological explanation does not fully account for the strength of the feeling. Even when you know intellectually that the future is uncertain, that plans change, that surprises happen, there is still a sense that whatever does happen will fit into an already existing structure. You do not feel like you are generating reality from nothing with each step. You feel like you are moving through something that has shape. Physics adds an unexpected layer to this intuition. When scientists began to understand the universe in terms of space-time rather than separate dimensions of space and time, the idea of a future that already exists stopped being just a philosophical curiosity. It became a reasonable interpretation of the mathematics. In space-time, events are not arranged in a sequence that comes into being one moment at a time. Instead, they are arranged as points in a four-dimensional structure. Each event has coordinates, where it is, when it is. From this perspective, your birth, your current state of listening, and some distant future moment all occupy their own positions within the same structure. Nothing in this description requires the structure itself to grow or update. There is no universal present moment sweeping across space-time, turning future events into present ones and present ones into past ones. All events are simply there, related to one another by their positions. This is where the feeling that tomorrow is already there begins to look less like a trick of the mind and more like an accurate reflection of how reality might be organized. If space-time exists as a whole, then tomorrow is not something that needs to be created. It already has a place. You're simply not experiencing it yet. The phrase, "not experiencing it yet," is important. Experience is not the same as existence. There are many things that exist that you are not currently experiencing. Other rooms in your home, other cities, other people's thoughts. Their existence does not depend on your awareness of them. You move into contact with them under certain conditions, but they do not spring into being when you arrive. If time is similar, then your movement through experience does not imply that reality itself is moving. It implies that your awareness has a limited range, and that range shifts. Relativity reinforces this idea in a way that is easy to overlook. In everyday life, we assume that there is a single present moment shared by everyone. We assume that what is happening now for you is also happening now for someone else, regardless of where they are. This assumption feels obvious, but it does not hold up under closer examination. According to relativity, simultaneity depends on your state of motion. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer may not be simultaneous to another observer moving at a different speed. There is no universal agreement on what counts as now. This is not a matter of perception or measurement error. It is built into the structure of space-time itself. If there is no universal present, then the idea of the universe progressing through a single shared moment becomes difficult to defend. Progressing relative to what? Advancing from which now to which next now? Without a global present, the notion of a cosmic passage of time loses its anchor. What remains is a structure in which all events exist, and different observers slice that structure differently depending on their motion. Each observer has their own sequence of experiences, their own ordering of events, but no observer's ordering is privileged as the one true flow of time. This can be unsettling when first encountered. It challenges deeply held intuitions, yet it also offers an explanation for why the future can feel both uncertain and strangely fixed at the same time. From within your experience, the future is open. You do not know what will happen. You make choices, you respond, you adapt. From the perspective of space-time as a whole, however, every event has its place, including the ones that involve your choices. This does not mean that your decisions are meaningless or predetermined in the way people often fear. It means that decisions themselves are events. They are part of the structure. The feeling of choosing is not an illusion layered on top of a fixed outcome. It is one of the processes through which the structure is realized. Think again of a book. The fact that the ending exists does not mean the characters within the story are not making choices. Their choices are what the story consists of. The reader's knowledge of the ending does not negate the reality of the decisions within the narrative. Similarly, the existence of future events in space-time does not erase the reality of the processes that lead to them. The strange comfort some people feel when thinking that tomorrow already exists may come from this separation between experience and structure. If nothing is truly rushing toward you, if nothing is being snatched away as moments pass, then the anxiety associated with time pressure can soften. You are not running out of reality. You're moving through a particular pattern of awareness within it. This does not eliminate uncertainty at the level that matters most to daily life. You still do not know how conversations will unfold. You still do not know what opportunities will arise or fade. Surprise remains intact. What changes is the background story you tell yourself about time itself. Instead of imagining time as something that carries you forward, whether you like it or not, you can imagine experience as a sequence of perspectives within a larger whole. Each perspective is complete in itself. Each has its own context, its own information, its own limitations. The fact that other perspectives exist does not diminish the one you are currently in. Another way to approach this feeling is to notice how often you act as though the future has already made up its mind. People say things like, "That was always going to happen," or "I knew this would come eventually." These statements often appear after the fact, but they reveal a deeper assumption, that events fit into a coherent pattern that existed even before they were experienced. At the same time, people also say, "I never saw that coming," acknowledging the limits of their foresight. Both attitudes coexist easily. We accept that the future has a definite shape once it arrives, even if we could not predict it in advance. This is exactly what a block-like view of time suggests. The shape exists. Our access to it is partial. Dreams sometimes intensify this feeling. In dreams, time behaves strangely. Events jump. Scenes shift. The sense of before and after becomes flexible, yet the dream itself feels complete while it is happening. It does not feel like it is being assembled frame by frame. It feels like you've entered a world that already has its own internal consistency. Waking life is not a dream, but the comparison highlights something important. Completeness and passage are not the same thing. Something can feel complete without feeling static. Something can feel dynamic without actually changing its underlying structure. When people say the future already exists, they are often responding to this tension intuitively, without formal language. They are noticing that anticipation does not feel like invention. It feels like approach. It feels like orientation within something larger. This orientation can show up in unexpected ways. Some people feel a sense of inevitability about certain life events without knowing why. Others feel drawn toward paths they cannot fully explain. These feelings do not require any mystical explanation. They can arise simply from the way minds navigate incomplete information within a structured reality. Your brain is constantly predicting what comes next. It does this to function efficiently. Every movement you make relies on predictions about the immediate future. When you reach for a cup, you predict where it will be when your hand arrives. When you speak, you predict how your words will unfold. These predictions are not optional. They are built into perception itself. Because prediction is so fundamental, the future is always present in your experience as a set of expectations. This makes the future feel active, involved, almost tangible. It is not a blank screen. It is a working model that updates continuously. What physics suggests is that this constant modelling may be tracking something real, not just a mental convenience. The future may feel structured because it is structured. Your predictions are not conjuring order from chaos. They're attempting to align with a reality that already has form. If tomorrow already exists, then what exactly is now? Why does it feel so special, so central, when physics struggles to define it at all? There is no need to resolve these ideas immediately. Let them sit alongside your ordinary sense of time. You can still check the clock. You can still plan for tomorrow. You can still feel anticipation or concern. None of that is threatened by the possibility that the future already has a place in the universe. For now, it is enough to notice the feeling itself, that quiet sense that what is coming is not empty, that it is waiting rather than forming, that tomorrow is already there, not rushing toward you, not pulling you along, but existing in its own right, connected to this moment without needing to replace it. At first glance, the present moment feels like the easiest thing in the world to identify. It feels obvious. It feels like the only thing that truly exists. You are here. You are listening. Whatever happened before is over, and whatever comes next has not arrived. This moment, right now, seems to sit cleanly between the two, like a thin but solid divider. Past on one side, future on the other, present in the middle. Yet the more closely you look at that divider, the harder it is to find. Try, for a moment, to notice the exact instant you would call now. Not loosely, not approximately. Try to locate it precisely. As soon as you attempt this, something odd happens. The instant you point to has already slipped away. What you thought was the present has become the immediate past, replaced by another moment that feels just as present, just as undeniable. The boundary keeps moving, or rather, it refuses to stay still long enough to be marked. This difficulty is not a flaw in your attention. It is not because you are distracted or tired. It is a structural problem. The present moment, as we intuitively imagine it, may not be a thing that can be isolated at all. In everyday life, we treat the present as having some duration. We speak of the present minute, the present hour, the present day. These stretches feel real enough, but they are already compromises. A minute contains many changes, a day contains thousands. If the present is defined as what is happening now, then how much change can it include before it stops being now and becomes then? Physics approaches this question very differently than common sense does. In physics, an event is something that happens at a specific location in space and time. It has coordinates. But an event is not a moment that flows. It does not linger. It simply is. When physicists describe a process unfolding, they describe a series of events related to one another, not a moving present that carries those events along. This distinction matters. A flowing present suggests motion. It suggests that reality itself is advancing. But if you look for evidence of this motion in the equations that describe the universe, you do not find it. You find relationships. You find correlations. You find patterns that connect one event to another. You do not find a parameter labeled now that updates itself as the universe runs. Even time itself in many equations behaves less like a current and more like a label. It identifies where an event sits within the structure. It does not push the event forward or pull it out of the future. This creates a problem for the idea of a universal present. If time is just another dimension, similar to space, then asking where the present is becomes similar to asking where here is without specifying a location. Here for whom? Relative to what? Relativity makes this issue unavoidable. According to special relativity, different observers can disagree about which events are happening at the same time. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer may occur in a different order for another observer moving at a different speed. There is no absolute present moment that all observers share. This is not a philosophical interpretation layered onto the theory. It is a direct consequence of how space-time works. The equations do not allow for a single global slice of time that everyone agrees is now. If the present moment were a real, objective feature of the universe, you would expect it to show up consistently across all frames of reference. It does not. What shows up instead are many different presents, each tied to a specific observer's motion and position. Each observer experiences a sequence of events, but there is no universal agreement about which events belong to the present slice of reality. This makes the present moment feel strangely local. It belongs to experience, not to the universe as a whole. Psychology reinforces this idea in a quieter way. Your sense of now is not instantaneous. It has thickness. When neuroscientists study perception, they find that what you experience as a single moment actually integrates information over a short window of time. Sounds, sights, and sensations that occur within this window are bundled together and experienced as simultaneous, even though they may not be processed at exactly the same instant. This window varies depending on context. In some situations, it may span tens of milliseconds. In others, it may stretch longer. Your brain smooths over these differences to give you a coherent experience. The present moment you feel is not a razor-thin point. It is a constructed interval. This construction is necessary. Without it, perception would fragment. You would not hear melodies, only isolated notes. You would not see motion, only disconnected positions. The present moment, as experienced, is a tool your brain uses to make sense of change. But a tool is not the same thing as a fundamental feature of reality. The fact that you experience a present does not mean the universe contains one. Memory plays a crucial role here. The present moment always includes a trace of the immediate past. You cannot perceive anything without a slight delay. Light takes time to reach your eyes. Nerve signals take time to travel. By the time you are aware of something, it has already happened. And yet your brain labels this awareness as now. This means that even your lived present is, strictly speaking, a reconstruction. It is a model built from recent information. The feeling of immediacy is convincing, but it does not correspond to a sharply defined instant in the external world. At the same time, anticipation leaks into the present as well. Your brain is constantly predicting what will happen next. These predictions influence perception. They shape how you interpret sensory input. In some cases, they even determine what you notice at all. Because prediction is woven into perception, the present moment contains an element of the future too. It is not a clean boundary. It is a blend of recent memory and near expectation. This blending makes the present feel rich and stable, but it also makes it difficult to define. It is not purely past. It is not purely future. It is an overlap. When people try to anchor themselves in the present through practices like mindfulness, they often notice this ambiguity. Paying close attention does not freeze time. It reveals its complexity. Sensations arise and fade. Thoughts appear and dissolve. The sense of now shifts continuously, even as it feels steady. What mindfulness often teaches is not that the present is a solid thing you can grasp, but that it is an ongoing process of awareness. A process does not have a single location. It unfolds. From a physical standpoint, the problem becomes even more striking when you consider the entire universe at once. If there is no universal present, then asking what is happening now everywhere is a meaningless question. What is happening now on a distant galaxy depends on your frame of reference. Change your speed, and the answer changes. This is deeply unintuitive because we are used to coordinating our lives around shared time. Clocks agree, calendars align, schedules work. These practical successes hide the deeper issue. The agreement we rely on is local and conventional. It works because differences at everyday speeds and distances are negligible. But negligible is not the same as non-existent. Once you move beyond the scales of daily life, the cracks appear. The present fractures into many equally valid slices, none of which can claim to be the true one. If the present moment cannot be pinned down physically, then why does it feel so central psychologically? One reason is that consciousness itself is sequential. You experience one state after another. You cannot be aware of multiple moments at once. Awareness has a direction, even if time itself does not. This direction creates the impression of passage. Each new state of awareness feels like an arrival. Each fading state feels like a departure. The contrast between these states produces the sensation of movement. But movement of awareness is not the same thing as movement of time. Awareness is something that happens within the structure. It does not define the structure. Imagine again the idea of a completed landscape. Walking through it produces a sequence of views. Each view feels current when you stand there. Each feels left behind when you move on. But the landscape itself does not move. It does not advance. It does not erase what you have passed. The present moment, in this analogy, is not a place in the landscape. It is the view from where you are standing. The view changes as you move, but the terrain remains. This way of thinking helps explain why the present feels both fleeting and stable. Fleeting because your perspective changes constantly. Stable because at any given point the view feels complete. It also explains why the present moment feels special even if it is not fundamental. It is special to you because it is where your awareness is currently located. That location matters for experience, even if it does not carve reality into universal segments. The difficulty of pinning down the present has consequences for how we think about time more broadly. If there is no objective present, then the idea of time passing becomes suspect. Passing relative to what? From which present to which next present? Instead of imagining time as something that flows, it may be more accurate to imagine experiences as ordered without a moving reference point. Order without motion. Sequence without passage. This idea can feel uncomfortable at first because it conflicts with the language we use and the habits we rely on. We are deeply invested in the idea of now. We build our lives around it. We say things like, live in the moment, and this is all there is. Yet those phrases may be pointing to something experiential rather than something metaphysical. They may be reminders about attention, not about the structure of reality. If the present moment is harder to pin down than it seems, that does not make it less meaningful. It makes it more personal. It belongs to how you engage with the world, not to the universe's architecture. And this brings us naturally to a deeper question. If the present is not a fundamental feature, and if the future already exists within the structure of space-time, then what exactly is changing? What gives rise to the sense that something is happening at all? At some point, usually without much announcement, physics stops describing the world in terms that sound like motion through time and starts describing it in terms of relationships that simply exist. This shift does not happen all at once, and it does not come with a single equation that declares time irrelevant. Instead, it emerges gradually as you follow the logic of the theories that work best. The more carefully physicists describe reality, the less they talk about time flowing, and the more they talk about structure. This is not because physicists are trying to be abstract or provocative. It happens because the language of flow turns out to be unnecessary for explaining what actually happens. When a concept does no explanatory work, it slowly disappears from the foundations, even if it remains useful in everyday speech. In classical mechanics, time still looks familiar. Objects move. Systems evolve. You write down equations that tell you where something will be at a later time if you know where it is now. This feels like motion through time, but even here, the equations themselves do not contain flow. They relate one state of a system to another state. Time is a parameter that labels those states, not an engine that pushes them along. You can see this by imagining the entire solution to an equation laid out at once. The equation does not need to be run by the universe, it simply describes a pattern. If the initial conditions are such and such, then the system has this entire history. Past and future appear together as part of the same mathematical object. As physics develops, this perspective becomes more explicit. When Einstein introduced relativity, time stopped being a universal ticking background and became part of the geometry of space-time. Geometry does not flow. A shape does not move through itself. It simply has properties, curvature, distance, relations between points. In general relativity, space-time is described as a four-dimensional structure whose geometry depends on the distribution of matter and energy. Massive objects curve space-time. That curvature affects how objects move. What we experience as gravity is not a force acting through time, but motion along the structure of spacetime itself. Notice what is missing from this description. There is no mention of spacetime changing moment by moment in some global sense. There are local changes in curvature. There are different regions with different properties. But the theory does not require a present moment sweeping across the universe, updating spacetime as it goes. Instead, spacetime is treated as a whole. Solutions to Einstein's equations describe entire universes, complete with their histories. These solutions are not generated one instant at a time. They exist as consistent structures. This idea becomes even clearer when physicists talk about spacetime diagrams. In these diagrams, time is represented as another axis, just like space. Events are points. World lines trace the paths of objects through spacetime. You can look at the entire diagram at once. Nothing in the diagram is privileged as the present. There is no arrow sweeping upward marking now. The diagram does not need to animate to be meaningful. It already contains everything the theory says exists. This way of thinking feels natural to physicists because it simplifies things. If you can describe the universe as a structure, you avoid having to explain what moves it forward. You avoid having to define a universal clock. You avoid having to explain why time flows at the same rate everywhere, which turns out not to be true anyway. Structure replaces flow because structure does more work with fewer assumptions. Quantum mechanics reinforces this shift, though in a different way. In many formulations of quantum theory, time appears as an external parameter rather than a dynamic quantity. The Schrödinger equation tells you how a quantum state changes with respect to time, but it does not tell you what time is. Time is assumed. It is not explained. This creates an odd tension. Space and matter are treated as quantum entities, subject to uncertainty and superposition, while time remains classical and fixed. This asymmetry is not because time is fundamentally different. It is because we do not yet have a complete theory that treats time and space on the same footing at the quantum level. When physicists attempt to build such a theory, something surprising happens. Time often disappears from the equations entirely. In approaches to quantum gravity, such as canonical quantum gravity, the fundamental equation describing the universe does not include a time variable. This equation describes the state of the universe as a whole, not its evolution in time. From this perspective, the universe is not something that evolves. It simply is. This result is not philosophical speculation. It is a direct outcome of applying the rules of quantum mechanics to spacetime itself. When spacetime becomes a quantum object, the usual notion of time as an external parameter no longer makes sense. What replaces it is structure. Relationships between configurations, correlations between parts of the universe. Change becomes something that is described internally, relative to other changes, not relative to an external clock. This idea is often unsettling because it clashes so strongly with experience. We feel change constantly. We feel duration. We feel sequence. How can a theory that removes time possibly describe a world like ours? The answer lies in the difference between fundamental description and effective description. At a fundamental level, physics may describe reality as a static structure. At higher levels, when you look at subsystems within that structure, you recover something that behaves like time. Think of a map. The map itself does not move. It does not change. Yet it contains routes. It contains paths that can be followed. A traveller on the map experiences a sequence of locations. The sequence feels dynamic, even though the map is static. Similarly, a universe described as a structure can contain sequences of events experienced by observers within it. The observer's experience is ordered. It has a direction. But the ordering does not require the structure itself to flow. This distinction helps explain why physics can stop talking about flow without denying experience. Physics is concerned with what exists and how it is related. Experience is concerned with how those relations are encountered by a particular system. When physicists talk about structure, they are not claiming that nothing happens. They are saying that happening does not require a global temporal current. It requires differences and relations. Causation, for example, does not require time to flow. It requires that certain events are related in specific ways. One event influences another. That influence is encoded in the structure. The order of influence can be represented without invoking a moving present. Even entropy, which is often cited as the source of time's arrow, fits into this picture. Entropy describes the distribution of states within a system. Low entropy states are rare. High entropy states are common. The tendency for systems to move toward higher entropy can be described as a pattern within the structure, not as a force pushing time forward. From the structural perspective, the universe contains many states with different entropy values. Observers find themselves in regions where entropy is lower in one direction along their experience and higher in the other. This asymmetry gives rise to the sensation of a past and a future, even if the underlying structure is timeless. What matters here is that the equations do not single out one direction as the direction of time's flow. They describe relations that allow observers to define an ordering locally. When physics talks about structure, it also changes how it talks about explanation. Instead of asking why the universe is changing now, physicists ask why the structure has the properties it does. Why this geometry? Why these correlations? Why these constants? This shift can feel cold or impersonal, but it has a quiet elegance. It removes unnecessary layers. It avoids anthropocentric assumptions. It treats the universe as something that exists independently of how it feels to be inside it. Yet the feeling remains, the sense of motion, the sense that something is happening right now. That feeling does not disappear simply because physics stops talking about it. Instead, it becomes something to be explained rather than assumed. Why does a structural universe give rise to beings who experience flow? Why does awareness move through a sequence rather than perceive the whole at once? These are not questions physics ignores. They are questions it postpones, recognizing that they belong at the intersection of physics, biology, and cognition. Brains are physical systems embedded in the structure. They process information locally. They record memory. They predict outcomes. They cannot access the entire structure at once. They sample it. Sampling creates sequence. Sequence creates narrative. Narrative creates the sensation of time passing. From this perspective, the passage of time is not a fundamental feature of the universe, but a feature of how certain systems interact with the universe. It is an emergent property of limited access. This idea becomes easier to tolerate when you notice how often structure replaces flow in other areas of science. Temperature, for example, feels like something that rises and falls. But at a fundamental level, temperature is not a thing that flows. It is a statistical property of many particles. Heat flow is a convenient description, not a fundamental substance moving around. Sound feels like something travelling through the air. At a deeper level, it is a pattern of pressure variations. Nothing flows. A structure changes configuration. Even solidity itself is structural. Objects feel solid because of electromagnetic interactions between atoms. There is no continuous substance filling space. There are relationships that resist compression. Time may belong in this category. It feels like something that flows because that is a useful, intuitive description at the human scale. At deeper levels, it dissolves into structure. This does not make clocks useless or schedules meaningless. It simply places them in context. They measure regularities within the structure. They do not reveal an underlying current. When physics stops talking about flow, it is not denying your experience. It is stepping back far enough to see what experience alone cannot reveal. It can be helpful to begin by noticing how strongly the moving film metaphor shapes the way we think about reality. From early on, we learn to imagine the world as something that updates itself moment by moment, like frames advancing on a screen. One frame replaces the previous one. The past frame disappears. The future frame has not yet arrived. The present frame is the only one that exists. This metaphor fits neatly with how experience feels from the inside, so neatly that we rarely question it. But metaphors are tools, not truths. And sometimes, a metaphor works so well at one scale that it quietly misleads us at another. Physics, especially modern physics, has been steadily nudging us away from the idea of the universe as a movie that is playing, and towards something more like a completed landscape. Not a frozen scene, not something static in the everyday sense, but a structure that already contains all of its parts, arranged in a particular way. A landscape does not unfold, it does not update, it does not wait for tomorrow to be added. Hills, valleys, rivers, and paths all exist together, whether or not anyone is walking through them. What changes is the position of the traveller, not the terrain itself. When physicists describe space-time, this is much closer to what they have in mind. Space-time is not something that plays out like a reel of film. It is something that has shape. Events are located within it. Objects trace paths through it. Those paths exist as part of the structure. This shift in perspective is subtle, but profound. A moving film suggests that reality itself is in motion, that there is a global process turning future frames into present ones, and present ones into past ones. A completed landscape suggests that reality is already there in its entirety, and that motion belongs to how particular systems move within it. One reason the film metaphor feels so natural is that films mirror our experience extremely well. We experience one moment at a time. We cannot see ahead. We cannot revisit earlier moments except through memory. The structure of experience matches the structure of a film being played. But the structure of experience does not have to match the structure of reality itself. Experience is constrained. It is local. It is sequential. Reality, as physics describes it, does not need to share those constraints. In space-time diagrams, which physicists use routinely, the universe already looks like a landscape. Time is laid out as an axis. Space is laid out as axes. Events are points. World lines are curves. Nothing moves through the diagram. The diagram simply represents relationships. If you draw the world line of a person from birth to death, you do not need to animate it to make sense of it. The entire life is there, represented as a continuous curve. The person experiences that life sequentially, but the diagram does not. This distinction can feel disturbing at first, because it seems to drain reality of vitality. If everything already exists, what is happening? Where is change? The answer is that change is not something added on top of structure. Change is a pattern within structure. Different parts of the landscape differ from one another. That difference is what change consists of. A mountain slope changes elevation as you walk along it, but the slope itself does not change. Your experience of elevation depends on where you are on the slope. Likewise, your experience of time depends on where you are within space-time. This helps clarify why the future can exist without being fixed in the way people fear. The future exists as part of the landscape, but that landscape includes paths shaped by choices, interactions, and contingencies. Those are not removed, they're included. Imagine a hiking map. The map shows many possible paths. The existence of the map does not force you to take a particular route, it simply contains the routes. Your walk traces one of them. In space-time, the situation is more subtle, because the routes are not all available from every point. The structure encodes constraints. Physics tells you which paths are possible and which are not. But within those constraints, many trajectories exist. From within experience, it still feels like you are deciding as you go, because decision-making is one of the processes that shape which path is taken. That process is part of the landscape too. The completed landscape picture becomes especially compelling when you consider relativity again, because there is no universal present. The idea of a film with a single frame that is currently playing becomes difficult to maintain. Whose frame is it? Which observer's present defines the frame being shown? If different observers slice space-time differently into past, present and future, then the idea of a single advancing frame makes no sense. A landscape, on the other hand, accommodates this naturally. Different observers simply take different paths and different cross-sections through the same structure. Another way to see the problem with the film metaphor is to ask what exactly is moving if time flows. Is the entire universe moving forward in time? Relative to what? There is nothing external to the universe that could serve as a reference. Motion without a reference frame is meaningless in physics. The film metaphor quietly assumes a background against which time advances. Physics finds no such background. There is no external clock ticking outside the universe. The landscape metaphor removes this issue entirely. Nothing moves relative to an external time. Motion is always motion within the structure. This perspective also aligns with how physics treats solutions to its fundamental equations. A solution is not something that comes into existence gradually. It is a complete description. When physicists solve equations describing a universe, they do not get what exists so far. They get a space-time with a full set of events. This is true even in cosmology. When physicists describe the Big Bang, they are not describing a moment when the universe began playing like a film. They are describing a boundary within space-time, a region with particular properties. The Big Bang is not the first frame, it is a feature of the landscape. This helps clarify another common confusion. People sometimes imagine the future as empty because it has not happened yet. But emptiness implies absence. In the landscape picture, absence does not apply. Regions of space-time are not empty just because you are not there. You are not currently in Paris, but Paris exists. You are not currently in the year 2120, but that region of space-time can exist too, even if no one alive today can access it. Access and existence are different concepts. The film metaphor conflates them. The landscape metaphor separates them cleanly. This separation can feel emotionally challenging because we are used to equating existence with availability. If something exists, we think we should be able to encounter it now. But that is not how reality works, even in space. Distance already limits access. Time may simply be another kind of distance. Seen this way, the future is not something rushing toward you. It is something located elsewhere. Your experience of approaching it is a matter of trajectory, not creation. This also reframes anxiety about time running out. If moments are not destroyed when they pass but remain part of the structure, then loss takes on a different character. You are not losing reality itself, you are losing access to certain regions from your current position. That distinction does not erase sadness or longing, but it removes the sense that the universe is actively taking things away from you. It is not erasing your past. It is simply that your path has moved on. The same applies to anticipation. The future is not looming. It is not closing in. It is simply there, connected to where you are now by the path you're on. The completed landscape idea also helps explain why memory feels so asymmetric. You remember the past but not the future, even if both exist in the structure. Memory is a physical process that leaves records. Those records exist in certain regions of space-time and not others. You carry them with you along your path. You do not carry records of future events because those records are not located where you are. They are located elsewhere. This asymmetry does not require time to flow. It requires only that records be distributed unevenly along paths. When people object that a completed universe would be lifeless or static, they are often importing everyday meanings of those words into a context where they do not apply. Static in everyday language means unchanging over time, but in a timeless structure, unchanging over time is meaningless. Change is represented spatially within the structure. A chessboard with a game laid out move by move on successive boards is not static in the sense of containing no action. It contains action encoded across configurations. The action is there, just not unfolding. The universe, in this view, is more like an enormous record of interactions than a performance in progress. That record is not passive. It encodes everything that happens. It just does not replay itself for an external audience. Your consciousness is not external. It is part of the record. It is one of the processes encoded in the structure. Your experience of flow is how that process is organized from the inside. This perspective also clarifies why it feels so difficult to imagine perceiving the whole at once. Your brain is not designed to do that. It is designed to operate locally. It samples information. It updates internal models. It does not step outside space-time to view it globally. The feeling of motion, of becoming, of things happening, arises because your awareness traces a path. Paths feel dynamic. Landscapes do not. But the dynamism belongs to the path, not to the ground beneath it. Once you begin to think this way, many familiar phrases take on a slightly different meaning. The future hasn't happened yet becomes, I haven't reached that region yet. The past is gone becomes, I am no longer located there. These are not just linguistic tweaks. They reflect a different underlying picture. Importantly, this picture does not ask you to live differently in any practical sense. You still plan, you still hope, you still regret, you still act. The difference is conceptual, not behavioral. What it offers is a way to reconcile the feeling that tomorrow is already there with the feeling that you are still genuinely moving through life. Both can be true if movement belongs to experience and existence belongs to structure. Relativity does not announce its conclusions loudly. It does not begin by declaring that the past, present, and future all exist at once. Instead, it arrives there quietly, almost reluctantly, by following a few simple assumptions to their logical end. What makes its implications so unsettling is not that they are exotic, but that they are unavoidable once you accept how space, time, and motion actually behave. To understand what relativity suggests about coexistence, it helps to start with what people assumed before it. In everyday thinking, and in classical physics, time was treated as universal. There was an assumption that the universe shared a single clock. No matter where you were or how you moved, now meant the same thing for everyone. If two events happened at the same time for one person, they happened at the same time for all people. This shared present felt so natural that it was rarely questioned. Einstein did question it, not because he was trying to be disruptive, but because experiments with light made the assumption impossible to maintain. The speed of light appeared to be the same for all observers, regardless of how fast they were moving. That single fact forced a radical rethink. If light speed is fixed, then time and space cannot be absolute. They must adjust depending on motion. One of the first casualties of this adjustment was simultaneity. In relativity, whether two events happen at the same time depends on your state of motion. An observer standing still relative to a train platform may judge two lightning strikes to be simultaneous. An observer moving on a train may judge one strike to happen before the other. Neither observer is wrong. There is no deeper fact that settles the disagreement. The universe does not provide a master clock to appeal to. This is not a trick of perception. It is not about delays in seeing the light. Even after correcting for signal travel time, the disagreement remains. The order of events is genuinely frame-dependent. Once this sinks in, the idea of a single present moment shared by the entire universe starts to unravel. If different observers have different sets of events they call now, then which one is the real present? Relativity offers no answer, because it does not recognize the question as meaningful. Instead of a universal present, relativity gives us many local presents. Each observer experiences a sequence of events along their own path through space-time. That sequence feels ordered and continuous, but there is no global slice of space-time that all observers agree is the present. This alone strongly suggests coexistence. If there is no unique present, then past and future cannot be defined in an absolute way either. What is future for one observer may already be past for another, depending on their relative motion and position. This is not speculative philosophy layered onto physics. It falls directly out of the geometry of space-time. Once you accept that space-time is four-dimensional and that time is intertwined with space, the idea that all events exist together becomes the simplest interpretation. In space-time, events are points. They do not come into existence when someone labels them present. They exist by virtue of being part of the structure. Their relationships to other events, such as which can influence which, are encoded geometrically. Causality still matters. Relativity does not allow arbitrary rearrangements of cause and effect. Light cones define which events can influence others, but within those constraints, there is no privileged moment that is singled out as the one that exists. This leads naturally to what is often called the block universe picture. In this picture, space-time is a block containing all events. The block does not grow. It does not update. It simply exists, with its entire structure intact. The past exists as regions of space-time with certain properties. The future exists as regions with other properties. The present as an objective feature does not exist at all. What exists instead are many different ways of slicing the block, each corresponding to a different observer's notion of simultaneity. For someone deeply accustomed to thinking in terms of flow, this can feel deeply counterintuitive. It feels as though something essential has been removed. Where is becoming? Where is change? Where is the movement from what was to what will be? Relativity's answer is subtle. Change exists along world lines. Objects have histories. Those histories are sequences of events ordered along paths. What does not exist is a universal change of the entire universe at once. From the inside, along a world line, you experience one event after another. You remember earlier ones. You anticipate later ones. That ordering is real. But it does not require the rest of space-time to be non-existent or waiting. Think of it like reading a sentence. You read words one at a time. The meaning unfolds as you go, but the sentence exists in its entirety on the page. The words you have not yet read are not unreal. They are simply not yet encountered. Relativity implies that the universe is more like the sentence than the act of reading it. Another way to see this is to consider how relativity treats distant events. Suppose you are sitting quietly in a chair. According to one way of slicing space-time, a certain distant star is exploding right now. According to another equally valid slicing, that explosion happened years ago. According to yet another, it has not happened yet. All of these descriptions are consistent with relativity. There is no experiment you can perform to determine which one is really happening now. The question has no physical answer. This does not mean the star's explosion is vague or indeterminate. It means that its placement in time relative to you is not absolute. The explosion is a fixed event in space-time. Its relation to your present experience depends on how space-time is sliced. If the present were a real, universal feature, this ambiguity would be impossible. There would be a fact of the matter about whether the explosion is happening now. Relativity denies that such a fact exists. This strongly supports the idea that all events coexist. The star's explosion is as real as you're listening to these words, regardless of how different observers relate them temporally. This coexistence does not flatten experience into sameness. It preserves structure. Different events have different relations. Some can influence others, some cannot. Some are accessible to you, some are not. Coexistence does not mean equivalence. One of the most common objections at this point is emotional rather than logical. If the future already exists, people worry that life becomes fixed, that hope and effort lose their meaning. But this objection rests on a misunderstanding of what existence means in this context. Existence does not imply inevitability from within experience. It does not mean that outcomes occur without processes. The processes are part of what exists. Your deliberations, your hesitations, your mistakes, your learning, your growth, all of these are events too. They are not bypassed. They are not skipped over. They are included. Relativity does not say that the future exists without you. It says that the future includes you. Another misunderstanding is to imagine that coexistence requires that all moments be equally accessible or equally vivid. That is not the case. Accessibility depends on causal structure. Memory depends on physical records. Awareness depends on brain states. You do not experience the future because your brain does not contain records of future events. That fact does not require the future to be unreal. It requires only that records are asymmetrically distributed. Relativity also helps explain why the passage of time feels so compelling, even if it is not fundamental. Because different observers have different sequences of events, each observer's experience has its own internal ordering. That ordering is consistent. It feels like a flow. But there is no need to synchronize these flows into a single cosmic river. They exist independently, like many paths through the same terrain. The deeper implication here is that the distinction between past, present, and future may be more about perspective than about ontology. It may be a way minds organize information, not a way reality organizes itself. This does not make the distinction arbitrary, it makes it contextual. Just as here depends on where you are, now depends on how you move. Both are meaningful locally, neither is universal. Relativity also dissolves the idea that the universe is constantly being updated. There is no cosmic refresh rate, no ticking frame counter. What exists does not need to be refreshed. Instead, reality is described in terms of relations that are timeless in the mathematical sense. Timeless does not mean static, it means complete. This completeness is what allows relativity to handle extreme situations so well. Black holes, high-speed travel, expanding space. In all of these cases, the block picture remains consistent. There is no need to imagine time struggling to keep up. Even cosmic expansion, which is often described as something happening over time, is better understood structurally. The universe's geometry includes regions with different properties. Expansion is encoded in how distances between world lines vary within the structure. It does not require time to be flowing forward to make it happen. When physicists calculate the age of the universe, they are not measuring how long it has been flowing. They are measuring distances along certain world lines within space-time. Age becomes a geometric quantity, not a measure of passage. This geometric view can feel alien, but it has proven remarkably effective. It predicts phenomena with extraordinary accuracy. Time dilation, length contraction, gravitational redshift. All of these emerge naturally when time is treated as part of structure rather than as a flowing medium. What is striking is how little this success depends on intuitive ideas of passage. The math does not care about flow, it cares about consistency. The coexistence of past, present, and future is not an extra assumption added to relativity. It is what remains when you remove assumptions that relativity shows to be false. If there is no universal present, then nothing prevents all times from existing together. In fact, trying to deny coexistence requires reintroducing a privileged present by hand, without any physical justification. Some philosophers and physicists have tried to salvage a moving present by adding extra structures to space-time, but these additions do no explanatory work. They do not change predictions. They do not resolve paradoxes. They simply make some people feel more comfortable. Relativity does not need them. What it offers instead is a quieter but more radical conclusion. Reality is not something that is happening. It is something that is. What happens is experience. This distinction does not diminish life. It clarifies it. Your experiences are not illusions. They are real processes occurring along your path through space-time. Their reality does not depend on the rest of space-time waiting its turn. Understanding this can soften the anxiety that comes from feeling carried along by time. You're not being swept forward by a force beyond your control. You are participating in a structure that already contains your participation. It feels almost insulting to common sense to suggest that now might depend on where you are and how you move. Now feels like the one thing that should not be negotiable. You may disagree about opinions, predictions, or memories, but surely the present moment is shared. Surely there is a single now that the universe agrees on, even if everything else is uncertain. And yet, this is precisely the idea that physics forces us to give up. The discomfort comes from how deeply the idea of a shared now is embedded in everyday life. Conversations rely on it. Schedules depend on it. Language assumes it. When you say something is happening now, you expect that statement to have a clear meaning that does not depend on who is listening or where they are located. In most practical situations, this expectation works well enough that it feels absolute. But practical usefulness is not the same thing as fundamental truth. The reason now feels universal is not because it actually is, but because under ordinary conditions differences are too small to notice. At everyday speeds and distances, the universe behaves in a way that closely approximates a shared present. Relativity does not contradict this, it explains it. The approximation holds because the effects that break it are negligible in daily life. Once you move beyond those conditions, the cracks widen. To understand why now depends on motion, it helps to let go of the idea that time is something that exists independently of everything else. In relativity, time is inseparable from space. Events are not located just in time or just in space, but in space-time, where something happens and when it happens are not independent facts. They form a single description. This alone already hints at why now cannot be universal. If time is part of space-time and space-time is affected by motion, then temporal relationships must be affected as well. Consider two observers moving relative to each other. Each observer carries their own clock. Each clock ticks normally for the person carrying it. Neither clock is broken. Neither observer is confused. Yet when they compare notes, they find that they do not agree on which distant events are happening at the same time. This disagreement is not due to delays in communication. It remains even after all signals are accounted for. It arises from the geometry of space-time itself. In relativity, each observer defines a set of events they consider simultaneous. This set is often visualized as a slice through space-time. For one observer, that slice tilts one way. For another observer, moving at a different speed, it tilts another way. The tilt changes which events fall into the category of now. No slice is privileged. No observer's now is more real than another's, each is equally valid. This means that what you call the present moment includes some events that another observer would call past or future, and what they call present includes events you would not yet include. This is not a minor technicality. It cuts directly against the idea that the universe has a single moving present. If now were a real feature of the universe, it would have to be the same for everyone, but relativity shows that it cannot be. The universe does not provide a universal now, it provides local experiences ordered along paths. You can think of it like this: each observer carries their own version of now with them, tied to their motion and location. That version works perfectly for organizing their own experiences. It does not need to agree with anyone else's to function. This local nature of now is deeply counterintuitive because we are used to synchronizing our lives. We set clocks, we agree on time zones, we coordinate events. All of this creates the impression of a shared temporal framework. But synchronization is a convention, not a revelation of fundamental structure. We define time zones, we agree on standards, we correct clocks. These practices are practical solutions to coordination problems, not evidence of an underlying universal present. Relativity becomes especially clear about this when dealing with distant events. Suppose you ask, what is happening right now on a planet in another galaxy? The question feels reasonable, but according to relativity, it has no unique answer. Different observers will give different answers, and none of them is wrong. This does not mean that the events on that planet are vague or undefined. They are perfectly well defined within space-time. What is undefined is their relation to your now. The mistake is assuming that now extends infinitely across space. It does not. It is local. This locality becomes even more striking when you consider acceleration and gravity. In general relativity, gravity affects the rate at which clocks tick. Clocks closer to massive objects run more slowly than clocks farther away. This is not a mechanical malfunction. It is a feature of space-time geometry. As a result, two observers at different gravitational potentials experience time differently. Their notions of simultaneity differ. Their nows do not line up neatly. Again, there is no universal correction that restores a single now. There is only the recognition that now is perspective dependent. This dependence does not make now meaningless. It makes it contextual. In everyday life, context is always present, even if we ignore it. Here depends on where you are. Up depends on gravity. Left depends on orientation. None of these concepts are universal, yet they are perfectly useful. Now belongs in the same category. Once you accept this, many puzzling features of time begin to make sense. The discomfort we feel when imagining a block universe often comes from trying to smuggle a universal now into a structure that does not support it. We imagine all moments existing, but still try to keep one moment special. Relativity does not allow that compromise. Either now is observer-dependent, or it is not fundamental at all. From the structural perspective, what exists are events and their relationships. Observers trace paths through these events. Along those paths they experience sequences. Those sequences feel like time passing, but the feeling arises from the ordering along the path, not from a global update of the universe. This explains why now feels so vivid, even though it lacks universal status. It is vivid because it marks the boundary of your awareness, not because it marks a boundary in reality. Your awareness is always located somewhere specific in space-time. It processes information from nearby events. It cannot process information from everywhere at once. That limitation creates a sense of immediacy. That immediacy is labelled now. Different observers, with different locations and motions, have different immediacies. None of them has access to a cosmic perspective. This also explains why the present moment feels so fragile. It seems to vanish as soon as you notice it. That is because it is not a thing. It is a relationship between your awareness and the events it is currently processing. Change the awareness, and the now changes. Change the motion, and the now shifts relative to distant events. From this angle, asking what is happening now in the entire universe is like asking what is here everywhere. The question assumes a universality that does not exist. Relativity replaces that assumption with something more flexible. There are many nows, each belongs to an observer, none rules the others. This plurality of nows fits naturally with the idea of a completed landscape. In a landscape, different viewpoints reveal different cross-sections. None of those cross-sections defines the whole. They are perspectives, not partitions. The landscape does not care which slice you call present. It contains them all. One might wonder why evolution would produce brains that insist on experiencing a single now, if now is not fundamental. The answer is straightforward. A single now is useful. It simplifies decision-making. It allows coordination of action. It reduces cognitive load. Brains that try to experience multiple times at once would be overwhelmed. Sequential awareness is efficient. Efficiency does not require metaphysical accuracy. It requires reliability within a limited domain. Our sense of now is reliable for navigating everyday environments. It is not designed to reflect the structure of space-time. This mismatch between intuition and structure is not unique to time. We feel solid objects because our nervous system responds to electromagnetic forces as resistance. At a deeper level, solidity dissolves into fields and probabilities. Yet solidity remains real for experience. Similarly, now remains real for experience even if it is not fundamental. Accepting this does not make life feel less immediate. If anything, it sharpens the understanding that immediacy is something you bring to the world, not something imposed by it. Your now is yours. It is not borrowed from the universe. It is generated by how you are situated within it. This also means that worrying about losing the present moment takes on a different meaning. You're not losing access to reality itself. You are shifting perspective. Another now replaces the previous one because awareness moves, not because time flows. Awareness cannot stand still. It is a process. Processes have ordering. That ordering is what you feel as passage. But the universe does not need to pass in order for processes to be ordered. Relativity strips away the idea of a universal stage manager announcing each new moment. In its place, it gives a quieter picture. A universe where all events exist, where relations matter, where observers carve out their own sequences, and where now is a local, personal feature of experience. Once you see this, the block universe no longer feels like a frozen prison. It feels like a structure spacious enough to contain many perspectives without forcing them into a single timeline. And this sets up an even deeper question. If there is no universal now, and if all events coexist within space-time, then what exactly do we mean when we say that time does not pass? How does that idea differ from the more familiar notion that time passes differently for different observers? The phrase "nothing is actually passing" tends to trigger immediate resistance, and that resistance is understandable. Passing is one of the most basic features of how life feels. Moments seem to arrive and leave. Days appear to move forward. Aging feels like something that happens to you, not something that simply exists. To suggest that nothing is passing sounds like a denial of the most obvious fact of experience. Yet the block universe idea does not deny experience. It challenges a particular interpretation of it. The block universe is not a separate theory invented to provoke discomfort. It is a name given to what remains once you take relativity seriously and stop adding assumptions that the physics itself does not require. When physicists talk about space-time as a four-dimensional entity containing all events, they are already describing a block universe, whether they use the phrase or not. In this picture, the universe is not something that grows by adding new moments. It does not have an advancing edge called the present. It does not shed its past like a snake shedding skin. All events, past, present, and future, are equally part of the structure. Nothing in the equations demands that one slice of space-time be privileged as the one that exists while the others wait or vanish. That demand comes from intuition, not from physics. To understand why the idea that nothing is passing is not as absurd as it first sounds, it helps to separate three things that are often tangled together: change, order, and passage. Change refers to differences between states. A glass falls and shatters. A child grows taller. A star burns fuel and eventually collapses. These differences are real. They are described precisely by physics. The block universe does not remove them. Order refers to the fact that these states are related in specific ways. Some events precede others. Some depend on others. Causes come before effects along certain paths. This ordering is also real and preserved. Passage is something extra. Passage is the idea that there is a moving spotlight, a universal now, that sweeps across the ordered states, turning future into present and present into past. This is the element the block universe discards. The key claim is not that change is illusory, but that passage is not fundamental. From within the block universe, change is represented spatially rather than temporally. Different regions of space-time have different properties. Along a given world line, properties vary. That variation is what we call change. There is no need for the universe itself to move in order for this to be true. The difficulty comes from how naturally we equate change with passage. In everyday life, they appear inseparable. When something changes, we feel that time must have passed, but this feeling arises from how we experience change, not from how change is structured at a fundamental level. Imagine a flip book. Each page shows a slightly different image. When you flip through it, you see motion. The motion feels real. But the pages themselves do not move relative to one another. They're already arranged in order. The sense of motion comes from how you engage with them. The block universe is like the flip book laid out all at once. The pages are there. The ordering is there. What is not there is the flipping mechanism built into the universe itself. You, as a conscious system, play the role of the page turner. Your awareness encounters one state after another. That encounter produces the sensation of passage. This distinction explains why the feeling of time passing is so powerful and so convincing. It is produced continuously by the way your brain operates. Brains are sequential processors. They cannot hold an entire lifetime of information in a single conscious state. They update, they overwrite, they predict. Each update feels like a new, now replacing an old one. That replacement feels like passage. But nothing in that process requires the universe to be updating. It requires only that your brain is. The block universe idea also clarifies why it is so difficult to imagine nothing passing. We are not used to separating experience from structure. We tend to assume that the way things feel is the way they are, yet we already accept this separation in many other contexts. The Earth feels flat. It is not. Objects feel solid. They are mostly empty space. The sun feels like it moves across the sky. It does not. In each case, experience is reliable for practical purposes, but misleading about fundamental structure. Time may be another example. One of the strongest objections to the block universe comes from the sense of openness we associate with the future. The future feels undetermined. It feels like it has not happened yet. If nothing is passing, how can that feeling be accounted for? The answer lies in information, not in existence. From your current position in space-time, you do not have access to information about future events. Your brain contains records of past events. It does not contain records of future ones. That asymmetry is enough to create the feeling that the past is fixed and the future is open. Openness in this sense is epistemic. It is about what you can know, not about what exists. The block universe does not say that the future is known. It says that it exists. Those are very different claims. Within the structure, future events exist without being accessible. From within experience, lack of access feels like non-existence. That feeling is compelling, but it does not settle the metaphysical question. Think again of space. There are places you have never been. From your current location, they are inaccessible. You may not know what is happening there, yet you do not conclude that they do not exist. You conclude that you lack access. Time may be similar. Future regions of space-time are inaccessible from your current position. That does not require them to be unreal. Another common objection is that if nothing is passing, then nothing is really happening. This objection confuses happening with passage. Events still happen in the block universe. They just do not happen by coming into existence. They happen by being located at certain places in space-time and by standing in causal relations to other events. When you say that something happened, you are locating it within a structure and relating it to other events. You're not describing a metaphysical act of creation. The language of happening is perfectly compatible with the block universe, as long as it is not interpreted as implying passage. Even phrases like, "the universe evolves," can be reinterpreted structurally. Evolution describes differences between states along paths, not a global update of existence. In fact, many physicists prefer this reinterpretation because it avoids unnecessary metaphysical commitments. It keeps the theory lean. The block universe also helps resolve certain puzzles that arise when passage is taken too seriously. For example, what exactly moves when time passes? Does the entire universe move forward in time? If so, Relative to what? Another time, this leads to an infinite regress. By denying passage at the fundamental level, the block universe avoids this problem entirely. Nothing moves relative to time. Motion is always motion within spacetime. Another puzzle concerns the speed of time. We often speak as though time flows at a certain rate. 1 second per second. But this phrase is meaningless. A rate compares two quantities. Saying time passes at 1 second per second compares time to itself. This linguistic oddity points to a deeper issue. The idea of time flowing at a rate is not well defined. The block universe removes the need for such a rate. Instead of asking how fast time passes, physics asks how intervals relate, how much proper time elapses along a given path, how clocks compare when they reunite. These are geometric questions, not dynamical ones. The block universe also fits naturally with the way relativity treats aging. In relativity, aging depends on the path you take through space-time. Different paths between the same events can have different lengths in time. That length is what we call aging. There is no need to imagine time flowing at different speeds. There are simply different path lengths. Aging becomes a geometric property, not a measure of passage. This geometric interpretation is not an add-on. It is how the theory works. From this perspective, saying that nothing is actually passing is not a denial of experience. It is a clarification of what experience is responding to. Experience responds to sequence. It responds to ordering. It responds to local change. It does not require a global flow. This distinction also helps explain why the block universe does not feel obvious. Our brains evolved to track change locally, not to represent global structure. We experience slices, not wholes. We experience motion along paths, not the map itself. Expecting experience to reveal the absence of passage is like expecting your sense of balance to reveal the curvature of space-time. It is not the right tool for the job. One might still worry that the block universe makes life feel static or predetermined. But this worry often dissolves once you recognize that static and dynamic are themselves time-based concepts. In a timeless structure, calling something static is a category error. What matters for life is not whether the universe passes, but whether processes occur, whether interactions matter, whether choices are part of the structure. The block universe includes all of that. Your choices do not float above the structure. They're embedded within it. They have causes. They have effects. They shape what happens next along your path. From within experience, you deliberate because deliberation is one of the processes that leads to certain outcomes rather than others. That process is real. It is not bypassed. The fact that the outcome exists in the structure does not make the process unreal. It makes the process part of what exists. This is a difficult point emotionally because we tend to equate openness with freedom. But openness, as a feeling, arises from uncertainty and limited information, not from metaphysical indeterminacy. You can feel free even in a deterministic universe. You can feel constrained even in an indeterministic one. The feeling of freedom depends more on how decisions are made than on how the universe is structured. The block universe leaves room for all of that complexity. Another subtle benefit of the block universe idea is that it removes the pressure of keeping up. If nothing is passing, then nothing is chasing you. You're not falling behind reality. You're not racing against a cosmic clock. You're simply located where you are, moving along a path that includes effort, rest, confusion, clarity, beginnings and endings. Those endings do not erase what came before. They mark boundaries along the path. The regions remain. This does not mean that grief or regret vanish. It means that they are recontextualized. Loss becomes about separation, not annihilation. You're separated from certain regions of your life by your current position, not by their destruction. Likewise, anticipation becomes about approach, not about creation. You're approaching regions that exist, not summoning them into being. These shifts in perspective can be quietly comforting, especially late at night when thoughts tend to spiral around time running out, moments slipping away, opportunities being missed. If nothing is actually passing, then nothing is being taken from the universe. Things change location relative to you, but they do not vanish. There is still an important piece missing. If the block universe is real, and if passage is not fundamental, then why does the illusion of passage feel so consistent, so structured, so hard to escape? Why does it feel directional? Why does it feel like it always goes one way? It may help to start with something simple and uncontroversial. Your brain is a physical system. It is made of matter. It obeys the laws of physics. Whatever your experience of time is, it must arise from physical processes happening inside that system. There is no separate channel through which time itself whispers instructions into your awareness. There are only neurons firing, chemicals moving, electrical signals propagating, and patterns being updated. From that starting point, the insistence on motion through time begins to look less mysterious and more inevitable. Brains do not perceive the world all at once. They cannot. They operate by sampling information, comparing it to stored patterns, updating internal models, and preparing responses. This cycle repeats continuously. Each repetition depends on the previous one. That dependency creates sequence. Sequence creates order. Order creates the sense that something is moving forward. This is not optional. A brain that did not operate sequentially would not function at all. It would not learn. It would not adapt. It would not survive. The insistence on sequence is built into the architecture. When you hear a sound, your brain does not receive the entire sound at once. It receives pressure variations over time. It integrates them. It constructs a coherent perception. The same is true for vision. Light hits your eyes in changing patterns. Your brain assembles those changes into motion, depth, continuity. At no point does your brain have access to a static, complete picture of the world. It always has a partial, delayed, reconstructed version. That version is updated constantly. The updates are what you experience as the passage of time. This alone would be enough to generate a sense of motion, even if the universe were completely static at the deepest level. Memory amplifies this effect dramatically. Your brain is constantly laying down records of previous states. These records are physical. They involve changes in synaptic strength, molecular configurations, network activity. Once laid down, they persist, at least for a while. Crucially, these records point in one direction only. You remember earlier states. You do not remember later ones. This asymmetry is not imposed by time itself. It is imposed by how physical systems store information. Creating a memory requires energy. It increases entropy. The laws of thermodynamics make it vastly more likely for records to exist of what we call the past than of what we call the future. As a result, your brain is always comparing its current state to records of earlier states. That comparison produces a sense of continuity. You feel that you were someone a moment ago and that you are someone now. The difference between those states feels like movement. Notice that nothing in this description requires time to flow. It requires only that the brain has access to records of some states and not others. Anticipation adds another layer. Your brain is not just a recorder. It is a predictor. It constantly generates expectations about what will happen next. These expectations are based on past experience. They are adjusted when predictions fail. This predictive machinery gives the future a special role in your experience. The future feels open because predictions are uncertain. You do not know which expectation will be confirmed. That uncertainty feels like possibility. At the same time, the future feels like it is coming toward you because predictions are always about what comes next. The brain is always leaning forward, so to speak, preparing for the next input, the next state, the next update. This forward-leaning posture creates a sense of motion, even if, at the structural level, there is no motion at all. Your brain cannot help but operate this way. A system that waited passively for the entire structure of reality to reveal itself would be useless. Survival requires anticipation. Anticipation requires sequence. Sequence feels like time moving. There is also the matter of attention. You can only attend to a limited amount of information at once. Attention shifts. It selects. It highlights some inputs and ignores others. Each shift feels like a new moment. When attention locks onto something, that thing feels present. When attention moves away, it feels past. This is true even over very short intervals. You can experience something as already gone almost immediately after attention shifts. This rapid turnover of attentional focus creates a stream-like quality to experience. The stream feels continuous, even though it is made of discrete updates. Neuroscientists sometimes talk about the brain operating in cycles or rhythms. Certain neural processes repeat at regular intervals. These rhythms help coordinate activity across different regions. They provide a kind of internal timing. But this internal timing is not a clock measuring an external flow. It is a coordination mechanism. It helps different processes line up. It does not tell the brain that time is passing, it simply structures activity. Yet from the inside, structured activity feels like passage. Another important factor is the way the brain constructs identity. You experience yourself as a persisting entity. You feel like the same person you were moments ago, even though the physical state of your brain has changed. This persistence is not given. It is constructed. The brain maintains a model of self that is updated continuously. That model includes memories, traits, goals, and expectations. Each update preserves enough continuity that you feel like one person moving through time rather than a series of disconnected states. This continuity is essential for functioning. Without it, experience would fragment. But continuity also implies movement. If there is a self that persists, and if its state changes, then it feels like that self is travelling through time. Again, this feeling arises from how the model is updated, not from how reality itself is structured. Language reinforces all of this. We talk about before and after. We talk about moving on. We talk about time passing, wasting, saving, losing. These metaphors are learned early and used constantly. They shape how we interpret experience. Once you have a language that encodes time as motion, it becomes very difficult to think otherwise. The metaphors do not feel like metaphors. They feel literal. But language evolved to coordinate action, not to describe space-time accurately. It reflects human-scale experience, not fundamental structure. Emotion intensifies the sense of motion even further. Strong emotions stretch or compress perceived duration. Fear can make moments feel elongated. Joy can make hours feel brief. These distortions reveal something important. If time itself were flowing at a fixed rate, and your brain were simply detecting that flow, then emotional state would not affect perceived duration so dramatically. The fact that it does tells us that perceived passage is constructed. When you are bored, your brain has little new information to process. Attention turns inward. Each update feels salient. Time seems to drag. When you're engaged, your brain is busy integrating information. Attention is absorbed. Updates blur together. Time seems to fly. The underlying physical processes continue at roughly the same pace, but the experience of passage changes dramatically. This variability would be impossible if the brain were simply reading off an external temporal flow. Sleep provides another clue. When you sleep without dreaming, you experience no passage at all. You close your eyes, you open them. Hours have gone by, but you did not feel them pass. If time itself were something you were immersed in, like water around a swimmer, it would be strange for awareness to skip it entirely. Yet, it does. What disappears during dreamless sleep is not time, but memory and awareness. Without records and without updates to conscious models, there is no experience of passage. Dreaming sleep is different. Dreams create sequences, they create narratives, they recreate the machinery of motion through time, even though the external world is largely disconnected. This further supports the idea that passage is something the brain generates when it constructs sequences, not something imposed by the universe. The insistence on motion through time also has evolutionary roots. Organisms that track change effectively have an advantage. Those that fail to notice patterns, delays, and sequences do not survive long. As a result, nervous systems evolve to be exquisitely sensitive to temporal ordering. They detect causality, they anticipate delays, they learn from sequences. This sensitivity is so strong that it spills over into metaphysics. We assume that because sequence matters so much to us, it must matter in the same way to reality itself. But evolution optimizes for survival, not for metaphysical accuracy. Another subtle contributor is the way goals are represented. Goals point toward future states. You act now to bring about a state that does not yet exist from your perspective. This structure of motivation reinforces the sense of moving toward something. Even if the future state exists in the block universe, your brain treats it as absent because it is not currently accessible. That treatment is adaptive. It motivates action. The brain does not need the future to be unreal to treat it as not yet experienced. It only needs it to be inaccessible. That distinction is easy to miss. From within experience, inaccessibility feels like non-existence. From a structural perspective, it does not. Your brain insists on experiencing motion through time because that insistence is how it functions. It cannot perceive structure all at once. It cannot operate without sequence. It cannot plan without imagining before and after. None of this implies that time itself passes. It implies that brains pass through states. The block universe does not contradict this. It explains it. It places the feeling of passage where it belongs, inside the systems that feel it. This perspective also helps explain why attempts to intellectually reject the passage of time rarely change how it feels. You can understand the block universe perfectly and still feel time rushing or dragging. Understanding does not rewire the brain's basic operating principles. It simply provides context. Just as understanding that the Earth rotates does not stop the sun from appearing to rise and set, understanding that time does not pass does not stop experience from unfolding sequentially. The goal here is not to eliminate the feeling of passage, but to see it clearly for what it is. When you do that, the feeling can soften. It can lose some of its urgency. You may notice that you're not being pushed forward by a force outside yourself. You're participating in a process that is part of the structure. You're not late for reality. You're not falling behind time. You're exactly where your path places you. This shift in perspective can be especially grounding when worries about the future or regrets about the past become overwhelming. Those worries are about access and information, not about existence. The past is not gone. It is not being erased. It is located elsewhere. The future is not rushing toward you. It is not closing in. It is located elsewhere too. Your brain experiences motion because it must. The universe does not. Why does time feel like it moves one way rather than another? Why does the sequence have an arrow? If the feeling of motion through time is something the brain generates, then memory and anticipation sit at the very center of that generation. They are not side effects. They are the mechanism. Without them, experience would lose its direction entirely. There would still be sensation. There would still be awareness. But there would be no sense of moving forward, no feeling that one moment replaces another, no impression that life is going somewhere. It is tempting to think of memory as something passive, like a storage room where the past is kept. In reality, memory is active, selective, and constantly rewritten. Every time you remember something, your brain reconstructs it. That reconstruction slightly alters the memory itself. The past you carry is not a fixed archive. It is a living process. This matters because the sense of forward movement depends on contrast. You feel that you are moving through time because your current state is continuously compared to remembered states. The difference between what you remember and what you're experiencing now creates the impression of change. Change, when ordered, feels like motion, but notice the asymmetry. You remember earlier states. You do not remember later ones. That asymmetry alone is enough to create an arrow. From a structural perspective, there is nothing in space-time that labels one direction as past and the other as future. The laws of physics at their most basic level are largely indifferent to direction. Many of them work just as well if time is mathematically reversed. Yet experience is not indifferent. It is strongly directional. Memory explains much of this. A memory is a physical record. It requires a change in a physical system that persists. Neurons adjust their connections. Molecules shift into new configurations. Energy is expended. Entropy increases. Once the record exists, it can be consulted. It can influence behavior. Creating a record of something that has not yet occurred is not physically forbidden in principle, but it is overwhelmingly unlikely. The conditions required to form such a record would themselves depend on future states, creating a circular dependency that nature does not realize. As a result, physical records overwhelmingly point in one direction. They point toward what we call the past. Your brain is filled with these records. Every thought you have is shaped by them. They give you continuity. They give you identity. They allow learning. At the same time, they lock experience into a particular orientation. You always face the direction in which records are absent. This absence is what we call the future. Anticipation fills that absence, but it does so imperfectly. Your brain does not know what will happen next. It guesses. It predicts. It runs simulations based on past data. Those simulations are tentative. They are revised constantly. The combination of stable memories and unstable predictions creates a powerful impression. The past feels fixed. The future feels open. The present feels like the boundary where one gives way to the other. But that boundary is not a feature of space-time. It is a feature of information. Your brain sits at a location in space-time where information about certain events is available, and information about others is not. That uneven distribution of information is enough to generate the illusion of forward movement. Think about how you navigate space. You know where you have been because you remember it. You do not know exactly what is around the next corner because you cannot see it yet. That does not mean the street around the corner does not exist. It means you lack access. Time works the same way, but the analogy is harder to accept because we are used to thinking of access and existence as the same thing when it comes to time. In space, we readily accept that places can exist without us being there. In time, we are less comfortable with that idea. Memory and anticipation conspire to reinforce the discomfort. Anticipation is often misunderstood as a weak form of memory. It is not. It is an active construction. Your brain constantly generates expectations about what will happen next. These expectations influence perception, they bias attention, they prepare actions. For example, when you walk, your brain predicts where your foot will land before it does. When you listen to speech, your brain predicts upcoming words. When you watch a familiar pattern, your brain predicts how it will continue. These predictions are so seamless that you rarely notice them, but they are always there. Prediction requires a direction. You predict what comes next, not what came before. That directional bias reinforces the sense of forward movement. Importantly, prediction does not require the future to be unreal. It requires only that the brain treats certain states as unknown. From the block universe perspective, the future exists but is informationally inaccessible. The brain treats that inaccessibility as openness. Openness feels like motion towards something undecided. Memory, by contrast, feels like certainty. You may misremember details, but you do not doubt that something happened. That certainty anchors the sense of having come from somewhere. Together, memory and anticipation create a narrative structure. There is a beginning, a middle, and an expected continuation. Narratives feel dynamic. They feel like they unfold. But narratives can exist fully formed. A novel exists in its entirety even though the reader experiences it sequentially. The unfolding belongs to the reading, not to the book. Your life feels like a story unfolding because your brain reads it one page at a time. Another important detail is that memory is not just about storing facts, it is also about storing order. You do not just remember that events occurred, you remember that one occurred before another. This ordering is crucial. It allows you to infer causality. It allows you to learn. It allows you to avoid repeating mistakes. But the ordering you remember is local. It is the ordering along your path through space-time. You do not remember the global ordering of all events. You remember a slice. That slice feels like the backbone of time itself because it is all you have access to. The illusion of forward movement strengthens because each new memory is added to the existing collection. The pile grows. The future pile does not. This accumulation creates a sense of build-up. It feels like something is being added to the universe, but what is actually being added is information within your brain. The universe does not gain content when you remember something. Your brain does. This distinction is subtle but critical. Imagine two people reading the same book from opposite ends. One starts at the beginning, the other starts at the end and reads backward, page by page. Each reader accumulates memories in a different order. Each experiences a different sense of progression. The book itself does not change. Similarly, different observers in space-time accumulate memories along different paths. Each experiences a sense of forward movement along their own ordering. The block universe accommodates all of these experiences without privileging any single direction as the direction of time itself. Emotion weaves tightly into this process. Memories are not neutral. They carry emotional weight. Anticipations do too. Regret pulls attention backward. Hope pulls attention forward. Anxiety stretches anticipation into imagined futures. Nostalgia thickens memory. These emotional forces exaggerate the sense of motion. They make the past feel heavy and the future feel pressing. But again, these are properties of mental states, not of space-time. When people say they feel stuck in the past or anxious about the future, they are describing patterns of attention and memory, not literal displacements in time. This becomes especially clear in conditions where memory is impaired. People with certain forms of amnesia lose the ability to form new memories. For them, the sense of time passing collapses. They may feel perpetually present, even though clocks and calendars move on. Their experience shows that passage is not something imposed externally. It is constructed internally. Similarly, in states of deep absorption or flow, the sense of forward movement weakens. Attention is fully engaged. Memory formation is altered. Anticipation fades. Time seems to disappear. In these states, nothing about the universe has changed. Only the balance between memory, anticipation, and attention has shifted. Sleep offers an even more dramatic example. In dreamless sleep, anticipation shuts down. Memory formation is minimal. Awareness ceases. When you wake, hours may have passed, but there is no experience of movement through them. The block universe predicts this perfectly. If passage were fundamental, it would be experienced regardless of awareness. The fact that it is not experienced when awareness is offline suggests that passage belongs to awareness, not to time itself. Dreaming sleep restores sequence. Dreams create stories. They create memories. They create anticipation within the dream narrative. Time returns, even though the external world is largely ignored. This tells us that the machinery of forward movement is internal. The illusion of forward movement also relies on the fact that memory is cumulative but fragile. Older memories fade, details blur. This creates a sense of distance. The past feels farther away as its records degrade. This fading contributes to the feeling that time moves on, carrying events away from you. In reality, the events are not moving. Your access to detailed records is diminishing. Photographs, journals, recordings temporarily resist this fading. They can make the past feel closer. They can compress subjective distance. Again, this shows that the sense of temporal distance is informational, not structural. Anticipation works in the opposite direction. As an anticipated event draws closer, predictions sharpen. Details become clearer. Emotional intensity rises. The future feels nearer. Nothing structural has changed. Your position in space-time has shifted slightly. What has changed dramatically is the quality of information available to your brain. The illusion of forward movement is strongest when memory and anticipation are both active and asymmetric. That is the default state of waking consciousness. The brain insists on this illusion because it is useful. It organizes behavior. It motivates action. It allows planning. But usefulness does not imply fundamentality. Just as the illusion of solidity is useful for interacting with objects, the illusion of passage is useful for navigating experience. Understanding this does not require you to abandon ordinary ways of speaking or thinking. You can still talk about time passing. You can still feel it. The point is not to eliminate the illusion, but to see its origin. Once you see that the sense of forward movement arises from memory pointing one way and anticipation pointing the other, the pressure eases slightly. The feeling becomes less mysterious and less threatening. You're not being dragged forward by an external force. You are being oriented by your own information structure. This perspective also changes how regret and fear can be approached. Regret is about information you carry that cannot be acted on from your current position. Fear is about information you lack but attempt to simulate. Both are natural. Neither implies that time itself is doing anything to you. The block universe remains intact throughout all of this. Memory and anticipation do not punch holes in it. They do not require passage, they are patterns within it. Your brain insists on motion, because motion is how it organizes its limited access to a complete structure. The next question follows almost automatically. If memory and anticipation create direction, why does that direction always seem to align with increasing disorder? Why does the arrow of time point the same way for memory, for causality, for experience? Entropy is often introduced as a technical term, something belonging to textbooks and equations rather than lived experience. Yet it quietly shapes nearly everything about how time feels. It determines why memory works the way it does, why anticipation has a direction, why causes precede effects, and why the illusion of forward movement is not random but remarkably consistent. Without entropy, time would not just feel different, it would barely feel like anything at all. To approach this carefully, it helps to strip entropy of its reputation as an abstract or gloomy concept. At its core, entropy is about counting. It's about how many ways a system can be arranged while still appearing the same at a large scale. A highly ordered state has very few possible arrangements. A disordered state has vastly more. This difference in numbers turns out to matter enormously. Imagine a simple system, like a deck of cards. There are an astonishing number of ways the cards can be arranged. Almost all of those arrangements look random. Only a tiny fraction look ordered, such as a deck sorted perfectly by suit and rank. If you shuffle the deck, it will almost certainly move from an ordered state to a disordered one. The reverse is technically possible, but so unlikely that it effectively never happens. Nothing in the laws of physics forbids the deck from shuffling itself back into perfect order. The problem is not prohibition, it is probability. The number of disordered arrangements dwarfs the number of ordered ones. Entropy is a measure of this imbalance. When physicists say that entropy tends to increase, they are not describing a force pushing things toward chaos. They are describing a statistical fact. Systems naturally move towards states that are more numerous simply because there are more ways to be there. This statistical tendency has profound consequences for time. At the microscopic level, the laws of physics are largely indifferent to direction. If you film two particles colliding and play the film backward, the reversed motion still obeys the equations. There is no preferred temporal direction written into those laws. Yet, at the macroscopic level, direction appears everywhere. Glasses shatter but do not unshatter. Heat flows from hot objects to cold ones. Smoke disperses rather than gathering itself back into a neat column. These processes feel irreversible. Entropy explains why. Irreversibility does not arise because the laws change. It arises because reverse processes would require systems to move from vastly more probable states to vastly less probable ones. While not impossible, such movements are so unlikely that they never occur in practice. This asymmetry in probability creates the arrow of time. Crucially, entropy does not require time to flow. It requires only that certain configurations are more likely than others within the structure of spacetime. The arrow emerges from the structure itself, not from passage. From the block universe perspective, spacetime contains regions of lower entropy and regions of higher entropy. Along many world lines, entropy increases in one direction. That direction becomes the direction of memory, causality, and experience. This explains why all the arrows line up. Memory formation requires an increase in entropy. To store information, a system must dissipate energy. Writing a memory is a physical process that leaves behind disorder elsewhere. As a result, memories point toward lower entropy states. You remember the low entropy past, not the high entropy future. Causality aligns with entropy because causes tend to be more ordered than effects. A single cause can produce many possible effects, but many effects rarely converge spontaneously into a single cause. This asymmetry is statistical, not metaphysical. Experience aligns with entropy because brains themselves are thermodynamic systems. They operate far from equilibrium, they consume energy, they generate waste heat. Their functioning depends on entropy gradients. As long as those gradients exist, experience has a direction. This is why the feeling of time moving forward is so stable. It is anchored in deep statistical features of the universe, not in cultural habits or linguistic conventions. Even if you reject the idea of passage intellectually, your brain continues to operate within entropy gradients. The illusion persists because the conditions that generate it persist, but it is still an illusion in a specific sense. It is an illusion of passage, not an illusion of change. Change is real. Entropy changes. Configurations differ. Structures evolve along paths. What entropy does not require is a moving present that updates reality itself. Instead, entropy provides a way to order events without invoking flow. To see this more clearly, consider again the block universe. The block contains regions of different entropy values. There is no rule that says entropy must increase globally. It simply varies across the structure. Observers find themselves in regions where entropy increases in one direction along their world lines. That direction becomes their future. The opposite direction where entropy decreases becomes their past. Nothing in this picture requires the block to grow or change. The gradients are part of the structure. They're already there. This helps resolve a common confusion. People often imagine entropy as something that increases over time, as if time were a container being filled. In the structural view, it is more accurate to say that time is defined by the ordering of entropy along paths. Entropy does not increase because time passes. Time feels directional because entropy increases along the paths that conscious systems occupy. This reversal of explanation is subtle but important. It also explains why entropy seems to give time a universal direction, even though relativity denies a universal present. While simultaneity is relative, entropy gradients are local. Each observer experiences their own arrow of increasing entropy along their own path. Those arrows align remarkably well across different systems, because they all originate from the same low entropy conditions early in the universe's history. This brings us to an even deeper question. Why was the universe in such a low entropy state to begin with? This question sits at the edge of current understanding. It is one of the most profound open problems in physics. The early universe appears to have been extraordinarily ordered, especially with respect to gravitational degrees of freedom. That initial order set the stage for everything that followed. Once that condition existed, entropy gradients emerged naturally. Structures formed, stars ignited, planets cooled, chemistry flourished, life appeared, brains evolved, memory became possible. All of this rests on that initial imbalance. From within experience, it feels as though time flows from the past into the future, carrying entropy with it. From the structural perspective, it is the presence of entropy gradients that makes experience feel that way. Order, paradoxically, is what makes direction visible. If the universe were already at maximum entropy everywhere, nothing would happen. There would be no gradients to drive processes. No memory could form. No anticipation would be meaningful. Experience itself would be impossible. In such a universe, time would not feel like it passes, not because it passes perfectly, but because nothing would change. The fact that time feels directional is a sign that the universe is not in equilibrium. It is a sign that there are differences to be encountered. Those differences are spatially and temporally arranged within the block. Entropy also explains why we cannot simply reverse experience. Even if the fundamental laws allow reversibility, the practical impossibility of reversing entropy makes backward experience unattainable. You cannot unburn a log because doing so would require coordinating an astronomically large number of particles into a precise configuration. Likewise, you cannot remember the future because forming such a memory would require entropy to decrease locally in a way that contradicts the overwhelming statistical tendency. The arrow of time, then, is not enforced by law but by likelihood. This likelihood is so extreme that it might as well be a law for all practical purposes, yet it remains a statistical fact, not a fundamental principle. Understanding this distinction helps soften the sense of inevitability often associated with time's arrow. The arrow is not imposed from outside, it emerges from conditions. Those conditions could, in principle, have been different. This is not to suggest that entropy will suddenly reverse or that experience could flip direction. It is to emphasize that directionality is contingent, not metaphysically absolute. Within the block universe, there's nothing contradictory about regions where entropy decreases. They are just extraordinarily rare. Conscious observers are vanishingly unlikely to arise there. This selection effect explains why time feels directional wherever there are minds to feel it. Entropy also reshapes how we think about order and disorder in everyday life. We often associate order with stability and disorder with chaos. In thermodynamics, order is fragile. It requires maintenance. It requires energy. Living systems maintain order locally by increasing disorder elsewhere. They export entropy. This export is what allows complexity to persist. Your brain does this constantly. Every thought produces heat. Every memory leaves waste. The feeling of time passing is inseparable from this metabolic churn. The illusion of forward movement is powered by dissipation. This may sound bleak, but it is also what makes experience possible. Without entropy gradients, there would be no differentiation between moments, no accumulation of memory, no sense of self. Entropy is not the enemy of meaning. It is its precondition. When people fear entropy as a kind of cosmic decay, they are often imagining it as something that erases structure. In reality, entropy allows structure to emerge temporarily within a broader tendency toward equilibrium. Those temporary structures include galaxies, ecosystems, and conscious minds. From the block universe perspective, all of these structures exist where they exist. They do not fight time. They occupy regions shaped by entropy gradients. Time feels directional because order gives way to disorder, along the paths that matter to us. That feeling does not require time to pass. It requires only that order be unevenly distributed. This brings us back to the central idea. The future already exists, but the passage of time does not. Entropy explains how this can be true without contradiction. The future exists as a region of space-time with certain properties, including higher entropy relative to the past. The sense of moving toward it arises because brains are oriented by entropy gradients. Nothing is being created. Nothing is being destroyed. The structure includes it all, yet from within experience the direction is unmistakable. You remember one way, you anticipate the other. You feel pulled forward, not backward. This pull is not a force exerted by time. It is the statistical tilt of the landscape. Understanding this does not flatten experience. It deepens it. It shows why the feeling of direction is so reliable and so hard to escape, even if passage itself is not fundamental. If the future exists and entropy gives time its arrow, what does that mean for decisions, responsibility, and the feeling that what you do matters? When people first encounter the idea that the future already exists, the concern that surfaces most reliably is not technical or scientific, it is personal. If the future exists, then what am I doing when I make a choice? If the outcome is already there, am I actually deciding anything at all, or am I just playing out something fixed? This concern feels immediate because it touches agency, responsibility, effort, regret, hope. These are not abstract concepts. They shape how life is lived. So it matters to approach this carefully, without shortcuts, and without smuggling in assumptions that are not actually required by the picture we've been building. The first thing to notice is that the worry itself already assumes a particular model of choice, one that feels intuitive but is not the only way to understand what choosing is. The intuitive model imagines the future as empty, and choice as something that fills it. On that picture, if the future is not empty, then choice seems to have nothing left to do. But that model quietly conflates two different ideas: existence and causation. In the block universe picture, the future exists, but it does not exist independently of the processes that lead to it. The processes are not skipped. They are not bypassed. They are part of what exists. Your choices are not something added after the structure is laid down. They are woven into it. To see why this matters, it helps to ask what a choice actually is in physical terms. A choice is not a magical interruption of physics. It is a process that occurs in a brain. Neurons integrate information, options are evaluated, motivations compete, a decision emerges. That decision then influences behavior, which in turn influences other events. All of that is causal. All of that is physical. All of that is part of spacetime. If the future exists, then it includes the moments in which you deliberate, hesitate, reconsider, and commit. It includes the internal struggle as well as the external action. Nothing about that is erased by coexistence. The mistake is imagining that if an outcome exists, then the path to it must be irrelevant. But paths are not decorations added after the fact. They are the structure. Think again of a completed landscape. A trail through the landscape exists as a trail because it winds through specific terrain. The bends, the climbs, the forks are what make it that trail. You cannot separate the endpoint from the path that leads there. The endpoint exists because the path exists. Likewise, a future event exists because the chain of causes that lead to it exists. Your choices are links in that chain. From within experience, choice feels like something happening in the present that affects what comes next. From the structural perspective, that entire sequence exists as a connected pattern. Both descriptions are true at their respective levels. This is where it becomes important to distinguish between determinism and fatalism, two ideas that are often confused. Determinism, in the physical sense, is the idea that events follow from prior conditions according to laws. Fatalism is the idea that outcomes will happen regardless of what you do. The block universe does not imply fatalism. In a fatalistic picture, your actions do not matter because the outcome is fixed independently of them. In the block universe, outcomes exist precisely because of the actions that occur. Remove the actions, and the outcome would be different. The structure would be different. This distinction is subtle but essential. Imagine watching a recorded chess game. Every move has already been played. The outcome exists, yet the outcome exists because of the moves. If a player had made a different move, the recorded game would be different. The fact that the recording exists does not make the moves irrelevant. The moves are what the recording consists of. The same logic applies to space-time. The future exists as a record of what happens, including what you decide. It is not a script handed down to you. It is a structure that includes you acting. Another way to see this is to notice that the block universe does not single out outcomes independently of causes. It does not say, this result must occur no matter what. It says, this entire pattern exists. Patterns include dependencies. From the inside, you do not experience yourself as being dragged toward a predetermined endpoint. You experience yourself as weighing reasons, responding to incentives, learning from feedback. That experience corresponds to real, causal processes. Nothing about the block universe turns those processes into illusions. The feeling that choice would be meaningless if the future exists often comes from imagining choice as something that floats above the physical world, something that injects novelty into an otherwise static structure. If that were what choice was, then coexistence would indeed threaten it. But choice has never worked that way. Choice has always been a physical process, shaped by biology, psychology, history, and context. It has always operated within constraints. You cannot choose arbitrarily. You choose among options that are available given who you are and where you are. Those constraints do not make choice meaningless. They make it intelligible. The block universe simply extends that intelligibility across the entire structure. There is also a common fear that if the future exists, then regret and responsibility lose their force. If what happened could not have been otherwise, why feel responsible? Why regret mistakes? This fear rests on another quiet assumption, that responsibility requires metaphysical openness in the sense of multiple futures all equally real until the moment of choice. But in everyday life, responsibility does not actually work that way. We hold people responsible because their actions express their values, intentions, and reasoning. We regret our own actions because they reflect who we were and what we cared about at the time. None of that depends on the future being unreal beforehand. Regret is not about wishing the universe had waited longer before existing. It is about recognizing that a different decision process would have led to a different pattern of events. That recognition still makes sense in the block universe. It is a comparison between structures, not a demand for passage. When you regret something, you're not saying, time should have flowed differently. You're saying, if my reasoning or priorities had been different, the outcome would have been different. That counterfactual remains meaningful even if the actual outcome exists. Similarly, praise and blame make sense because they respond to how decisions are made, not to whether the future was open in some metaphysical sense. A person who acts thoughtfully and compassionately is different, in a physically real way, from a person who acts impulsively or cruelly. That difference matters. It shapes patterns of interaction. It affects future states within the structure. The block universe does not flatten those distinctions. It preserves them. Another layer of confusion comes from imagining that if the future exists, then it must exist in the same way as the past as something fixed and unchangeable. But existence does not come in degrees of flexibility. It comes in relations. The past feels fixed because records of it are widespread. The future feels flexible because records of it are scarce. That difference is informational, not ontological. From your current position, the future is underdetermined because you do not know which of many possible paths you are on. But the actual path exists, including your uncertainty, your deliberation, and your eventual choice. Uncertainty does not require non-existence. It requires limited access. This is already familiar in space. You may not know which road another driver will take at an intersection. That uncertainty does not imply that their eventual route does not exist. It implies that you lack information. Time is treated differently only because we're embedded in it in a particular way. There is also the question of free will itself. which is often treated as a single concept but actually contains several different ideas. Some people mean by free will the ability to act without constraints. Others mean the ability to act according to one's reasons. Others mean the ability to have done otherwise in exactly the same circumstances. The block universe is incompatible with some versions of free will and perfectly compatible with others. If free will is defined as exemption from causation, then it is already incompatible with physics, regardless of whether time passes. No serious physical theory allows actions to pop into existence without causes. If free will is defined as the capacity for actions to flow from internal states like beliefs, desires, and values, then the block universe supports it fully. Those internal states are part of the structure. They do causal work. If free will is defined as the existence of multiple equally real futures branching from the present, then the block universe rejects that picture. But it rejects it not because it hates freedom, but because relativity leaves no room for a single present from which such branches could meaningfully diverge. The important question, then, is which notion of free will actually matters for living. Most people care about whether their actions express who they are, whether they can learn and change, whether effort matters, whether reasons count. All of those remain intact. You can still become a different person over time. That becoming is a sequence of physical changes in your brain and body. Those changes exist in the block. They are not cancelled by coexistence. In fact, the block universe arguably takes growth more seriously. It treats who you are at different stages as genuinely different states, not as fleeting phases that vanish when replaced. Your past self does not disappear. Your future self is not a vague potential. Both are real, connected by a path that includes effort, failure, insight, and adjustment. This perspective can soften harsh self-judgment. You're not trapped in a single static identity. You're a sequence of states, each one conditioned by the previous, each one contributing to what comes next. Choice operates within that sequence. It is not a moment of metaphysical creation. It is a moment of causal contribution. One final source of discomfort comes from imagining that if the future exists, then there is nothing to look forward to, because it is already there. But looking forward is not about existence. It is about access and anticipation. You can look forward to a place you know exists. The existence of a destination does not make the journey meaningless. It gives it context. Likewise, the existence of future moments does not drain them of significance. It means they are waiting to be encountered, not that they are already felt. Anticipation still matters because anticipation is an experience that occurs now. Hope still matters because hope shapes decisions. Fear still matters because fear influences caution. These experiences are not rendered hollow by coexistence. They are part of the structure. If anything, the block universe reframes responsibility in a quieter, steadier way. You are not responsible for creating reality out of nothing. You are responsible for how you move through what exists. Your reasons, your care, your attention, your effort, these shape the path you trace. Nothing about that requires time to pass. The next question is less about agency and more about stillness. If passage is not fundamental, and if choice operates within structure, then what does it mean to say that stillness might be closer to reality than motion? It can feel unsettling to suggest that stillness might be closer to reality than motion, because motion is how life announces itself. Hearts beat, lungs expand, thoughts arise, bodies move from place to place. Even when you sit quietly, there is a sense of internal activity. Stillness, by contrast, often feels like absence, like nothing happening, like a pause that cannot last. Yet this reaction already hints at something important. Stillness feels unfamiliar not because it is rare, but because it is hidden beneath experience. To see why stillness might be closer to reality than motion, it helps to be precise about what kind of stillness is being suggested. This is not the stillness of an unmoving object, frozen in time. That idea still relies on time passing. It imagines something staying the same while moments tick by. That is not the stillness we are talking about. The stillness in question is structural. It is the stillness of a complete arrangement, a total pattern that does not need to update itself in order to contain change. From within experience, motion feels primary. From the outside, in the language of physics, motion is something that happens within a structure that does not itself move. This distinction is easy to miss because we are always inside the motion. We never step outside the structure to see it whole. Consider how we normally define motion. Motion is change of position over time. An object moves if it occupies different places at different times. That definition already assumes time as a background parameter that progresses. If time itself is not passing, then motion must be reinterpreted. In the block universe picture, objects do not move through time. They have world lines. A world line is a path laid out in spacetime. The entire path exists as a single entity. What we call motion is the fact that different points along the path correspond to different spatial positions. Nothing needs to travel along the path for the path to exist. This can be hard to accept because it runs directly against the way motion feels from the inside. When you walk across a room, you feel yourself moving. Muscles contract, balance shifts, visual scenes change. All of this feels dynamic, but these dynamics are local processes occurring along your world line. They do not imply that the world line itself is being created or advanced. They imply that different segments of it have different properties. From the structural perspective, your walking across the room is already there, fully described. The beginning of the walk, the middle and the end all exist as parts of the same structure. The stillness is not at the level of experience, it is at the level of existence. Physics consistently points toward this kind of stillness. When physicists solve equations describing systems, they do not usually think in terms of systems unfolding moment by moment. They think in terms of complete solutions. A solution specifies the entire behavior of the system across time. The solution itself does not change. It contains change. This is true in classical mechanics, in relativity, and in many approaches to quantum theory. The mathematics does not require a moving present. It requires consistency across the structure. This mathematical stillness is not a philosophical preference. It is a practical one. It simplifies explanation. It avoids unnecessary assumptions. It aligns with observed phenomena. When physicists talk about symmetries, conservation laws and invariants, they are talking about features that do not change. These unchanging features govern how change occurs. They are deeper than motion. For example, conservation of energy is a statement about stillness in disguise. It says that despite all the apparent activity in the universe, something remains constant. Energy changes form, but the total does not vary. Conservation of momentum, conservation of charge, these are all expressions of underlying stillness. They are constraints on motion that do not themselves move. The laws of physics themselves are another example. They do not evolve as the universe evolves. They are not updated moment by moment. They apply everywhere, everywhen. If reality were fundamentally about motion, it would be strange for its deepest descriptions to be so static. The block universe takes this seriously. It treats the universe not as something happening, but as something that is. This does not deny the reality of events. It denies that events come into being in the way we imagine. When something happens from the structural perspective, it is not being created. It is being encountered by an observer whose awareness is limited to a particular region of space-time. Encounter is not creation. This distinction becomes clearer if you return to the analogy of a landscape. A landscape is still, but it contains rivers, winds, animals, growth, erosion. These processes occur within the landscape. They are part of its structure. The landscape itself does not need to move for rivers to flow within it. Similarly, space-time does not need to pass for processes to occur within it. Stillness in this sense is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is the stillness of a completed pattern. One reason this idea feels counterintuitive is that we associate stillness with inactivity. In everyday life, when nothing is happening, we say it is still. But that is a category mistake when applied to structure. A musical score is still. It does not change when it is played. Yet it contains motion. It contains rhythm. It contains progression. The motion belongs to the performance, not to the score. The universe, in the block picture, is closer to the score than to the performance. Experience is the performance. When you listen to music, the notes arrive in sequence. They feel like they are happening. But the score does not wait for the music to be played before it exists. The score contains silence, tension, release, repetition, variation. All of that is present without motion. Similarly, spacetime contains change without passing. Stillness might be closer to reality because reality does not need to update itself to contain novelty. Novelty is encountered, not produced in real time. This idea also sheds light on why attempts to grasp the present moment feel frustrating. People try to catch now, to hold it still, to freeze it. But if reality itself is already still, then trying to impose stillness at the level of experience is misguided. Experience is motion through a still structure. Trying to stop experience from moving is like trying to stop reading a sentence in order to see the whole sentence at once. You cannot, because reading is sequential. The stillness belongs to the page, not to the act of reading. This also explains why stillness practices like meditation often feel paradoxical. You sit still, but thoughts keep moving, sensations keep changing, time still seems to pass. What sometimes emerges in deeper practice is not a cessation of change, but a shift in identification. Instead of identifying with the movement, attention rests more easily in the background that does not move. That background is not time, it is awareness of structure. From the block universe perspective, awareness itself is a process, but it is a process that can notice the absence of passage without eliminating sequence. You can notice that things change without feeling that something is pushing them to change. This is a subtle shift, but it is important. Another reason stillness feels threatening is that we associate motion with life and stillness with death. A body that does not move is no longer alive. A heart that is still is stopped. But this association is local and biological. It does not generalize to the structure of reality. Life is motion within structure. Death is the cessation of certain processes. Neither implies that the structure itself changes its status. The block universe contains living processes and non-living ones. It contains motion and rest as patterns. It does not equate stillness with non-existence. In fact, from the structural perspective, nothing ever slips into non-existence. Events do not vanish when they are over, they remain part of the structure. This can be deeply counterintuitive because experience teaches us that things come and go. But coming and going are descriptions of access, not of existence. A person leaves a room, they're gone from your perspective, they still exist. A moment passes, it is gone from your awareness. It still exists. Stillness in this sense is the persistence of structure beyond access. This idea can be emotionally charged because it touches on loss. We grieve because people and moments feel gone. The block universe does not erase grief, but it reframes what is lost. What is lost is contact, not existence. This does not make grief disappear. It does not make absence painless. But it removes the idea that the universe itself is erasing what mattered. Stillness at the level of reality means that nothing meaningful is destroyed by time. The motion you feel is your movement through the structure, not the structure's movement away from you. Another way to see this is to consider how we measure time. We measure it by change. Clocks count oscillations. Calendars count cycles. We do not measure time directly. We infer it from regular patterns. If time itself were flowing, you might expect to be able to measure that flow independently of change. But you cannot. All measures of time reduce to measures of change. This suggests that time is a way of organizing change, not a substance that flows. If time is an organizational tool, then stillness at the level of structure makes sense. Organization does not move, it relates. This also helps explain why extreme physical theories struggle with time. In attempts to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity, time often drops out of the fundamental equations. Physicists then try to recover time as an emergent concept. What emerges is not flow, but ordering. The deeper the theory goes, the less motion it assigns to time itself. This trend is not accidental. It reflects the fact that motion is something that happens to things, not something that defines existence. Stillness is closer to reality because existence does not require updating. You can also see this in how we think about explanation. When something changes, we ask why. We look for causes. Causes are relations between events. Those relations exist whether or not the events are currently being experienced. Explanation does not require passage, it requires structure. Once you begin to think this way, the obsession with what is happening now begins to soften. Now stops feeling like the only real point in existence. It becomes a perspective, a location, a vantage point. From that vantage point, things seem to move. From the outside, they are arranged. Neither view is wrong. They answer different questions. Motion answers the question of experience. Stillness answers the question of structure. Stillness might be closer to reality, because structure is what remains when you strip away perspective. This does not mean that motion is illusory in the sense of being fake. It is illusory in the sense of being perspectival. A shadow moves across the ground as the sun sets. The shadow's motion is real, but it does not require the ground to move. It requires a changing relation between light, object, and surface. Similarly, the motion of time requires changing relations between awareness, memory, and anticipation. It does not require the universe to move. Recognizing this can change how urgency feels. If reality itself is not rushing, then the pressure to keep up loses some of its edge. You still have deadlines. You still have limits. Bodies age. Opportunities depend on conditions. None of that disappears, but the background story changes. You're no longer racing against a cosmic conveyor belt. You are navigating a landscape. Navigation requires attention, not speed. Stillness, in this sense, is not something to achieve. It is something to recognize. It is already there, beneath the motion. If the universe is complete, if time does not pass, and if stillness underlies motion, then what does it mean to live inside a moment that never truly leaves? Living inside a moment that never truly leaves is not something that requires a new belief or a dramatic shift in behavior. It does not ask you to stop planning, stop remembering, or stop caring about what comes next. It asks only for a quiet adjustment in how you understand what it means for something to be present and what it means for something to be gone. Most of the tension we feel around time comes from the assumption that moments are fragile, that they exist briefly and then vanish, taking their reality with them. We feel pressure, because now feels like a narrow platform suspended between a past that no longer exists and a future that does not yet exist. Balance feels difficult when the ground seems to be disappearing beneath your feet. But if the structure we have been exploring is accurate, then that platform is not narrow at all. It is not suspended. It is simply where you are standing. The moment you are in does not replace the one before it. It does not erase it. It does not consume it. It exists alongside it, connected by relations rather than by destruction. From this perspective, living inside a moment that never truly leaves means recognizing that presence is not a state the universe enters and exits. It is a feature of awareness. You are present because your awareness is localized, not because reality has selected a single slice to exist. This distinction matters because it changes how loss, memory, and change are understood at a deep level. When something meaningful happens, we often say, "I wish I could stay in that moment." The wish carries the assumption that the moment is slipping away, that it is being pulled into non-existence by time. But if moments are regions of space-time rather than fleeting instants, then nothing is being erased. What changes is your position relative to them. You do not leave a moment because it disappears. You leave it because your path continues elsewhere. This does not make the leaving painless. Separation still hurts. Distance still matters. But the pain is not compounded by annihilation. The moment remains what it was. It does not fade. Your access fades. In everyday language, we treat access and existence as the same thing when it comes to time. We say things like, "That's gone now," or "It's over," or "It doesn't exist anymore." These phrases feel natural, but they are shortcuts. They compress a more complex situation into something emotionally manageable. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves means loosening those shortcuts, at least internally, and noticing the difference between not being there and not existing. This difference already exists in how we think about space. You can leave a place you love. The place still exists. You can return to it, or not. Its existence does not depend on your presence. Time feels harsher, because return feels impossible. But impossibility of return does not imply non-existence. It implies one-way access. One-way access is not the same as destruction. When this begins to sink in, the emotional tone of memory can shift. Memory stops feeling like a desperate attempt to preserve something that is dissolving. It becomes a way of reconnecting with something that still has its own place. You are not holding on to ashes. You are recalling a location you once occupied. This does not mean memory becomes perfect or comforting. Memories are still partial. They are still reconstructed. They are still influenced by emotion, but their role changes slightly. They are not the only thing keeping the past alive. They are simply one way of touching it. The same applies to the present moment itself. We often talk about being present as though presence was something that could be lost or regained. We imagine drifting away from now into distraction or worry. From the structural perspective, you never leave the moment you're in. You leave awareness of it. Your attention shifts. Your mind simulates other regions, but your physical existence remains exactly where it is. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves means recognizing that you cannot fall out of now. You can only stop noticing it. This can soften the urgency that often accompanies attempts to be present. You do not need to capture the moment before it escapes. It is not escaping. You're already inside it. The sense of pressure relaxes when presence is no longer treated as a scarce resource. This understanding also changes how anticipation feels. We often experience the future as something looming, something approaching, something that will eventually replace the present whether we are ready or not. But if moments coexist, then the future is not marching toward you. You are moving toward it. That movement is not a threat. It is a trajectory. Trajectories can be adjusted. They respond to forces. They curve. They slow. They speed up. They are not conveyor belts. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves means understanding that you are not being pushed. You are navigating. Navigation requires attention, not panic. This perspective can be especially grounding when thinking about aging. Aging often feels like evidence that time is doing something to you, wearing you down, carrying you away from who you were. But aging, in the block universe picture, is a property of your world line. Different segments of that world line have different physical properties. Cells divide differently. Muscles respond differently. Energy is processed differently. Nothing is being taken away by time itself. The structure includes variation. You're not being moved farther from your past self by a flowing current. You're occupying a different region of the same structure. Your earlier self is not erased. Your later self is not approaching like an invader. Both are real, connected, and distinct. This does not eliminate grief about aging. It does not eliminate fear of decline, but it reframes what those fears are about. They are about change within structure, not about loss to nothingness. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves also affects how endings are understood. Endings are often the hardest thing to accept, precisely because they feel like annihilation. A relationship ends, a phase of life ends, a person dies. We speak of these events as if something has been removed from reality itself. But in the structural view, an ending marks a boundary, not a deletion. It marks where a particular pattern stops being extended along a path. The pattern remains where it is. This does not trivialize endings. It does not deny their finality in terms of access. You cannot go back and continue where the pattern ended. But you're not watching something be erased. Finality and erasure are not the same. This distinction can feel subtle, but it matters emotionally. It shifts the background story against which loss is experienced. Instead of, "this is gone forever," the story becomes, "this is no longer where I am." That may sound like a small change in wording, but it can soften the sense that reality itself is hostile or wasteful. Reality is not discarding what mattered. It is holding it in place. This also changes how meaning is experienced. Meaning often feels fragile because it seems tied to moments that pass. We worry that if a moment does not last, it was somehow less real or less valuable. But if moments do not vanish, then their value is not undermined by their position. A meaningful experience does not need to be prolonged to be real. Its reality is not measured by duration. It is measured by existence. The fact that you are no longer located there does not reduce what it was. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves allows meaning to detach from urgency. You do not need to extract everything from now before it disappears. You can allow it to be what it is. This can change how attention feels. Attention often feels strained because it is trying to hold on to something fleeting. When the fear of disappearance eases, attention can relax. Relaxed attention does not mean disengaged attention. It means less grasping. This relaxation can also extend planning and ambition. Planning often carries an undertone of racing against time. We worry about missing windows, running out of chances, falling behind. Some of those worries are practical. Bodies have limits. Circumstances change. Opportunities depend on conditions. None of that is denied here. What changes is the background anxiety that treats time itself as the enemy. If time is not something that passes, then it is not something that steals. You're still constrained by your position and your path, but you're not being chased by an abstract force. This makes effort feel different. Effort becomes about shaping trajectories rather than beating the clock. Shaping trajectories requires patience and responsiveness, not panic. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves also reshapes how rest is understood. Rest is often framed as stopping for a moment before time resumes its push. We rest quickly, nervously, as though time is waiting to resume its work. But if time is not passing, then rest is not borrowed from anything. It is not taken at the expense of progress. It is simply another region of the structure with different properties. Rest exists as fully as effort does. You're not pausing reality when you rest. You're occupying a part of it that is quieter. This can make rest feel more legitimate, less defensive. The same applies to boredom, waiting, and stillness. These states often feel uncomfortable because they make the sensation of passage more obvious. When nothing much happens, time seems to drag, but dragging is an experience, not a property of reality. If you notice that you are inside a moment that is not leaving, then waiting stops being about enduring time and starts being about inhabiting a particular configuration. This does not automatically make waiting pleasant, but it removes the sense that something is wrong because nothing is happening. Nothing needs to happen for reality to be complete. Another consequence of this perspective is that it softens the boundary between ordinary moments and important ones. We tend to rank moments by how much we fear losing them. But if moments do not vanish, then importance does not depend on urgency. A quiet moment is not less real than an exciting one. A routine day is not thinner in existence than a dramatic one. They differ in content, not in reality. This can subtly rebalance attention. You may find it easier to allow uneventful moments to be what they are, without the background sense that they are being wasted. They are not going anywhere. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves also affects how we relate to mistakes. Mistakes often hurt because they feel irreversible, as though time has slammed a door. But irreversibility is about path dependence, not about erasure. A mistake marks a branching point in the structure. After it, certain trajectories are no longer available. That is real. But the version of you who made the mistake does not disappear. That state exists. It can be understood. It can be learned from. Learning is itself a process that alters subsequent segments of the path. This allows responsibility without self-annihilation. You're accountable for what you did without needing to believe that time has destroyed something essential. The structure holds all of it. This also reframes forgiveness, both of others and of yourself. Forgiveness does not mean pretending something did not happen. It means adjusting how its existence influences the present. Since the past is not vanishing, forgiveness is not about letting go of something that is slipping away. It is about changing your relationship to something that remains. That is a more realistic task. Living inside a moment that never truly leaves does not require constant awareness of the block universe. You do not need to remind yourself of spacetime diagrams throughout the day. This perspective is not meant to replace ordinary thinking. It is meant to undercut a particular form of anxiety. The anxiety that says, if I do not hold on to this, it will be gone forever. The anxiety that says, as time is running out. The anxiety that says, everything meaningful is slipping through my fingers. Those anxieties are understandable. They arise naturally from how the brain constructs experience. But they are not descriptions of reality. They are responses to limited access. When you see that limitation for what it is, the emotional grip can loosen. You may still care deeply. You may still plan carefully. You may still feel urgency when circumstances demand it. But the background sense of loss can soften. The moment you're in is not a fragile bubble. It is a location. You cannot break it by leaving it. As this perspective settles, the idea that the universe is already complete stops feeling abstract. It starts to feel like a quiet reassurance rather than a cold conclusion. Nothing important is being erased. Nothing meaningful is being wasted. You're not too late for reality. You're exactly where you are. If the universe is already complete, if moments do not truly leave, and if experience is a way of moving through structure rather than being carried by time, then what does it mean to rest inside that understanding? As everything we've explored begins to settle, there is no need to gather it into a conclusion in the usual sense. Nothing here needs to be wrapped up, resolved, or turned into a takeaway. The ideas do not require agreement, and they certainly do not require effort. They are not instructions, they are an orientation, something you can lean back into rather than hold on to. Resting inside a universe that is already complete is not about convincing yourself of a theory. It is about allowing a different background story to exist quietly behind experience, without demanding attention. Most of the time, life feels like movement because experience is movement. Thoughts arise, sensations shift, attention drifts, plans form and dissolve. This movement is real at the level that matters for living. Nothing we've talked about asks you to deny that. What changes is the sense of what is doing the moving. Instead of imagining yourself being carried forward by time, you can imagine yourself tracing a path through something that does not rush, does not hurry, does not demand that you keep up. The pressure eases when the background stops moving. This does not make life static, it makes it spacious. When the universe is imagined as something unfolding, there is an implied urgency. Each moment feels like it must be used before it disappears. Each decision feels heavy because time seems to be closing behind it. Rest feels borrowed. Stillness feels risky. But if the universe is already complete, then urgency is no longer built into reality itself. Urgency becomes situational, not cosmic. It arises from practical constraints, not from the structure of existence. This distinction matters more than it might seem. Practical urgency is manageable. It responds to context. It comes and goes. Cosmic urgency does not. It feels relentless because it is imagined as universal and unavoidable. Letting go of cosmic urgency does not make you careless. It makes you less tense. You can still care deeply. You can still act decisively. You can still value time as a resource for living. What softens is the sense that reality itself is slipping away from you. Nothing is slipping away. You're moving. That movement includes effort and rest, attention and distraction, clarity and confusion. None of those states threaten the structure they occur within. This can change how rest feels at a very basic level. Rest is often experienced as a pause taken against resistance. Even when the body lies down, the mind may feel as though it should be doing something else, because time is imagined as continuing to push forward regardless. But if time is not passing, then rest is not something you take away from progress. It is not a delay. It is not falling behind. Rest is simply a region of the structure where certain demands are lower. You're not stopping the universe when you rest. You're occupying a quieter configuration. That realization can make rest deeper, even if nothing about your habits changes. The same applies to sleep. Sleep often feels like surrendering hours to time, as though those hours are being lost. People say things like, "I lost track of time," or "the night just disappeared." But sleep does not erase anything. It is not a gap in existence. It is a stretch of experience where awareness is altered or absent. The structure does not skip over it. It includes it fully. When you wake up, nothing has moved ahead of you. You have simply arrived at a different point along your path. This can be quietly comforting, especially when sleep feels fragile or difficult. There is no race to fall asleep before something is lost. Nothing is draining away while you lie there. You're already where you're supposed to be, because supposed to be has no meaning outside of paths and conditions. Another place this perspective can settle is around regret. Regret often carries a sharp edge because it feels like time has slammed a door. A choice was made, a moment passed. The opportunity is gone forever, but gone forever usually means inaccessible, not non-existent. The state in which you made that choice exists. The reasoning you used exists. The emotions you felt exist. They are part of the structure. You cannot return to them, but you're not denied their reality. This distinction allows regret to transform into understanding without turning into self-erasure. You do not need to believe that time has destroyed a better version of your life in order to learn from the path you're on. Learning itself is part of the structure. So is forgiveness. Forgiveness is often framed as letting go of the past, as though the past were something slipping away. But if the past does not vanish, forgiveness takes on a different shape. Forgiveness becomes a change in how the present relates to what exists elsewhere in the structure. It is a reconfiguration of influence, not a denial of reality. That can make forgiveness feel less like denial and more like adjustment. The same applies to grief. Grief does not end because understanding arrives. Loss still hurts. Separation still matters. The inability to return is real. What can soften is the background sense that reality itself has become poorer, that something has been erased from existence. The structure has not been diminished. What has changed is access. This does not solve grief, but it can remove an additional layer of existential pain that often accompanies it. You are not mourning something that fell out of reality. You are mourning a separation that matters because connection mattered. That meaning remains intact. Resting inside a universe that is already complete also changes how anticipation feels. Anticipation often carries anxiety because the future is imagined as a force approaching, something that will eventually collide with the present whether you're ready or not. But if the future exists as a region you are moving toward, then anticipation becomes orientation rather than dread. You are not waiting for something to happen to you. You're approaching something through a series of states that include preparation, adjustment, and choice. Approach feels different from impact. Approach allows responsiveness. This does not eliminate uncertainty. You still do not know exactly what you will encounter, but uncertainty becomes a feature of limited perspective, not a threat imposed by time. Limited perspective is natural. It is what makes experience possible. If you could see the entire structure at once, nothing would feel immediate. Nothing would feel surprising. Nothing would feel lived. The fact that you cannot see it all is not a flaw. It is the condition under which meaning arises. Meaning does not come from novelty being created in real time. It comes from encounter. Encounter requires limitation. Resting inside completeness does not require you to dissolve into passivity. It allows activity to happen without being framed as resistance against time. You're not pushing against a current. You're moving along terrain. Terrain can be difficult. There can be obstacles, inclines, rough ground. None of that is denied. What disappears is the idea that the ground itself is moving under your feet. This can subtly change how effort feels. Effort often feels heavy because it is framed as racing against something. Deadlines, aging, decay, loss. All of these are real in practical terms, but they do not need to be interpreted as the universe pressing forward. Effort becomes lighter when it is understood as navigation rather than struggle against passage. Navigation can be tiring, but it is purposeful. Struggle against passage feels futile, because passage is imagined as unstoppable. Removing that framing does not make life easy. It makes it less adversarial. Another place this perspective can rest is in ordinary moments that feel unimportant. So much of life is made of moments that do not stand out. Waiting in line, sitting quietly, repeating familiar routines. These moments often feel thin, as though they barely exist because they will not be remembered. But if moments do not vanish, then importance is not tied to memorability. A moment does not need to leave a record in order to be real. Its reality is not measured by whether it becomes a story later. This can make ordinary moments feel less disposable. They are not filler between important events. They are regions of the structure with their own character. You do not need to make them meaningful by extracting something from them. Their existence is already complete. This is especially relevant late at night, when the mind tends to wander toward questions of time wasted, days lost, years gone. Those thoughts often assume that unremarkable moments were somehow not fully real, but they were not thin, they were simply quiet. Quiet does not mean empty. Resting inside a universe that is already complete allows quiet to be what it is, without the need to justify it. This perspective also softens the idea of endings. Endings feel heavy because they are imagined as final acts of erasure. Something was here, and now it is gone. But endings are boundaries in experience, not cuts in existence. A story ends on the last page, but the story does not vanish. The last page does not destroy the earlier ones. Finality is about access, not annihilation. This matters because fear of endings often spills into fear of death. Death is perhaps the most emotionally charged example of the belief that time erases. From the structural perspective, a life does not vanish when it ends. It stops extending along a path. That distinction does not remove fear or sadness. It does not make death easy. What it can remove is the idea that existence itself is fragile, that reality is constantly consuming what matters. Reality is not consuming anything. It is holding everything in place. This can change the tone of reflection, especially when the mind drifts toward large, unanswerable questions late at night. Instead of feeling like you're watching everything slip away, you can feel like you're moving through something vast that does not rush you. That vastness is not cold, it is patient. Resting inside this picture does not require constant awareness. You do not need to remind yourself of space-time or block universes throughout the day. This is not a belief to repeat. It is a background orientation you can return to when time feels heavy. When the thought arises, "I'm running out of time," you can quietly ask, "Running out of access to what?" When the thought arises, "This moment is disappearing," you can ask, "Or am I just moving?" These questions are not meant to be answered forcefully. They are meant to loosen a grip. The grip is what creates tension. Letting go of that grip does not stop life from unfolding. It allows unfolding to feel less like loss. There is nothing you need to do with this understanding. You do not need to adopt it fully. You do not need to defend it. You do not need to integrate it into your identity. You can let it sit lightly like a possibility. Possibilities do not demand commitment. They offer perspective, and perspective can be restful. As you continue listening, or as you allow attention to drift, or as sleep begins to approach, there is no transition you need to make. Nothing is ending. Nothing is beginning. You're simply where you are. The universe is not moving on without you. It is already complete, and you are already inside it.